Recess at school is a special time. Just rang the long-awaited bell, and a crowd of children with squealing runs out of each class, rushing who goes wherever with all their feet. In 10 minutes you have so much to do and buy a bun, and eat an apple, and run around the schoolyard. And today is also the end of the school year. They have to get all the books to the library. Kate, the young librarian, could hardly cope with the crowd of mischief makers, and she tried to calm them down. "5th B, stay here. The rest of you wait outside," she reminded them. "Textbooks must be handed in good condition. If a book is torn, it must first be put in order before it can be brought in. I'll check everything, and whoever's in debt will not get a report card. All right, Parker, give me your books." "What is this?" Who drew Lomonosov's mustache with a pen. "How can you not be ashamed? You got a new history book at the beginning of the year." In such a mode, the day flew by unnoticed. The working day came to an end. Everyone was going home, and the girl still had a lot to do. She had to prepare something to take to her mom in the hospital to eat, and then to go on a date. How could she get everything done? Kate lived in the city center in a modest one-bedroom. Her mother, Elizabeth Johnson, raised her daughter alone. About her father only mentioned in passing that he died long ago, before she was born. She had taught high school French all her life. They had many books in their flat, including in French. It was her mother who instilled in her daughter from childhood a love for this beautiful language of love. Together they learnt poems in French, grammar, read Madame Bovary by Flaubert in the original language. Kate was good at it. She dreamed, like her mum, of becoming a teacher. But it didn't work out. She couldn't get in on the budget. There were only 3 places, and those were taken by children of influential people, and there was not enough money for the paid department. The girl decided to go to correspondence school, and while she was studying, in order not to waste time and help her mum, she got a job in the school library. Here you could quietly prepare for the session, and the experience was going. The girl was not used to saving money. Her mother had impeccable taste in clothes. She taught her daughter how to create a fashionable wardrobe from the minimum. It is enough to have a few good basic things and just play them up with a scarf, a handbag, decorative accessories. And here is a completely new image. And her mother was also very good at knitting, and Kate often showed off in a hat, a voluminous scarf, or a beautiful cardigan. And no one even guessed that the thing is not bought in a shop and connected by hand. Kate and her mother lived in full harmony, almost never quarreled. They were not just as mother and daughter, but as best friends. The girl used to trust her mother. She knew all her secrets. She would not judge, would not nag or teach. Even if she gives advice, then very tactfully and unobtrusively. Elizabeth Johnson has long been worried about the joint in the knee, once fell unluckily in the ice. Every year the situation only worsened. Neither pills nor injections nor ointments helped. I needed an operation to completely replace the joint, but it was a lot of money. According to the insurance, it was possible to put only a cheap prosthesis, and the operation was more traumatic. Mom tried to take a loan from the bank, but she was not approved for such an amount. Her salary was too small. Then she was advised to turn to a businessman privately. He gave her money, but on the security of a flat and at an obscene interest rate. The whole sum had to be paid back in a year. The situation was hopeless. The woman had been walking with a cane for 6 months, limping badly, and Mom and Kate agreed. The operation, fortunately, was successful. Elizabeth Johnson was soon to be discharged. Her daughter visited her every day, tried to please her with something tasty, and was very worried about her health. To help her mother faster pay off the debt, Kate decided to try to tutoring because she knew French perfectly. She began to take students at home. She was very fond of children, well with them, found a common language, never shouted. She was patient, and the kids were happy to go to her classes. Apparently, the talent for teaching from Kate's mom was passed on in full. One day, a young boy, Justin, came to her to study. He was from a very wealthy family. His parents have their own furniture factory. To communicate with foreign customers and partners, he needed to know at least a little of the language, and he could not give it to the guy. At first sight, the young people liked each other. Justin could not help but admire the young, sweet, but so serious girl. She was not like everyone else. No makeup or false eyelashes. All her beauty was natural, thick wheat curls, slim stature, and a lively mind. It's such a rare combination these days. Justin was a fortunate man. Since childhood, he had never been denied anything. His father always solved all his problems and difficulties himself. He came to these classes more out of curiosity than anything else. He could not believe that some girl, yesterday's schoolgirl herself, could teach him something. Before that, his parents had paid for famous tutors. But by the third lesson, Justin was unbearably bored. He yawned and did not master the material at all. The young man fell in love with Kate at first sight. By nature, he was inattentive, listened to lectures poorly, was always spinning, distracted, and Kate was angry and grumbled. "Yes, Justin, you're not listening to me at all. We're not getting this far. It's my job to teach you, and you're just making eyes at me. I'm flattered, of course, but let's get to the lesson. If you're not good at listening, it happens. I'll try to visualize and make cards for the next lesson." Justin smiled so cheerfully and excused himself. "I'm sorry, I can't help it. When I saw you, I couldn't help it. All I can think about is asking you out. Why don't we meet tonight? I happen to have 2 tickets to a rock band playing. They're only in town for 2 days on tour. Please, go for it. I promise, then I'll listen carefully. I'll even learn my homework, I promise." Kate laughed. "Justin, you're like a child, honestly. Okay, we'll go to your concert. And now we'll learn the cases. So, repeat after me." And so a passionate romance began between the young people. Kate also fell in love with Justin. He was so sincere, cheerful, so hot whispered to her about love. But Elizabeth Johnson was not happy about it, shook her head. "Oh, my daughter, you've fallen in love with Smith. Everybody in town knows that family. Arrogant rich people, underpaying their workers, cheating them. They've got a lot of turnover in their company. They don't like ordinary people. They're just servants to them. My heart tells me this is not going to end well. I don't think Justin's parents will accept you. We live modestly, not like them." Kate replied eagerly. "What are you saying, Mummy? Justin's not like that. He loves me so much. We're going to talk to his parents and get married. Justin's graduating too. He's been interning with his father's company for the last few months. It's going to be fine, Mummy, you'll see." But as it turned out, Mum was right about a lot of things. Meeting Justin's parents had been more like an interrogation. Kate blushed and didn't know what to do. Mrs. Linda glared at her. "It's very strange why that young girl is wasting her time in the library. It pays a pittance. How are you going to live? At my son's expense, I suppose. That's very clever. Who's your father, or doesn't your mum know?" "I'm not surprised," she said. Justin tried to defend his lover to his mother. "Mum, why are you bothering? Kate's very smart. She tutors. She's helping her mum who's sick. She'll finish university by correspondence and find a better job with a diploma, maybe even a translator. And her mum's a French teacher, by the way. And anyway, is money what happiness is all about? Kate and I love each other, and we've decided to get married. We're young, and we have our whole lives ahead of us. We'll make more money. You and Daddy won't mind the wedding, will you?" Mrs. Linda was very upset. "It's getting better by the hour. Is the bride in such a hurry to get married? What's the rush? You're still on your feet, aren't you? Neither has she. How are you gentlemen going to live? Think carefully, son, before it's too late, or you'll regret it all your life." It was Justin's father, James Smith, who suddenly stood up for Kate. He lashed out at his wife. "Linda, what's the matter with you? Are you jealous? I think Kate's a decent girl. I don't make it up. If they love each other, let them get married. We'll do it in a nice restaurant, and they can stay with us for a while they get used to it. Who did I build this house for? Stop this interrogation. Let's eat hot food, or soon everything will get cold." The rest of the evening passed quietly, but still Kate had a bad feeling. How would they live in Justin's house if her future mother-in-law didn't like her? Good thing her future father-in-law and Justin were on her side. The young ones moved in. Kate tried both ways to please, baking cakes, cleaning. But it was all for nothing. Mrs. Linda glared at her and said, "My God, why do you go about the house like a savage? Or are you so uncultivated? You have to learn how to do everything. And remember, Justin likes smoothies in the morning, not just juice. How hard is that to remember? And stop running around at night. You're the wife of 5 minutes. I'm not running around, Kate defended herself. I'm visiting my mom. She's still recovering from her operation. And the pupils come round. You don't let them come here. Where am I supposed to study with them? Linda's eyes bulged. Of course I don't. It's a decent house, not a backyard. Where's the money from your tutoring? I don't get it. You're walking around like a gray mouse. Kate was angry. Mom had borrowed a large sum from businessman Cage for an operation. Now she has to pay it back, so I'm helping her out. When I pay her back, I'll be able to provide for the whole family. For now, just my salary. Linda was stunned. So you're poor and in debt. What a mess. You're in trouble, son. She decided to go to this Cage to find out everything and make sure that this wedding did not happen. On the day of the wedding, Kate was very nervous. She didn't understand why Justin was in such a hurry. He was glowing and looking at her with loving eyes. The guy knew Kate hadn't let him get close to her all this time. It never got any further than hot kisses. She honestly admitted that she had never had intimacy before, and she did not want, like her mother, to raise a child alone. If she got pregnant, her fiancé talked her up and down, said he'd be careful. But Kate stood her ground. That's why Justin initiated the wedding himself. He could already imagine undressing and kissing his Kate. He couldn't wait to feel what it would be like to be the first. His friends twisted their heads and chuckled. Justin, are you nuts? You're 25, just out of university. What wedding? He was a normal bloke, dating like everyone else. You've had all kinds of girls hitting on you, and you've got a crush on this gray mouse. Look, maybe she's got you hooked. Justin was angry and waving his arms around. You don't understand anything. Kate, she's special. She's not like all those other girls. She's smart, she's serious. She's fun to be with. And how does she recite poetry in French? It's to die for. What's so interesting? If you like a girl, you don't have to do anything. She jumps into bed all by herself. Boring. This is different. It's like a game, like an adventure. I've never had emotions like this before. So what if it's a wedding? We'll have fun at my dad's expense. It'll be easy to get divorced. At least Kate will be all mine, and then we'll see. The fun was in full swing when the mother-in-law, having drunk a lot of champagne, took the microphone in her hands. She held some paper, intriguingly led a glance around the hall, ordered to switch off the music, and began to say terrible things. Dear guests, may I have your attention, please? I was originally against this wedding, but my son wouldn't listen to me, and he shouldn't have. I have a promissory note that I bought from a businessman. So now, Elizabeth, you don't owe him money, you owe me money. And you won't pay him back for a year, but only 4 months. So you must hurry up, madam, or you'll find yourself on the street. Isn't this a wonderful surprise? Linda laughed, and her husband began to drag her off the stage and shouted at her to shut up. William was unbearably ashamed of his spouse's behavior. He tried to apologize and replay everything, saying that it was an unfortunate joke. Everyone gasped and hummed for a long time. Elizabeth Johnson cried. It was as if she was smeared with mud in front of everyone, humiliated, made a laughingstock. The woman went home, even though Kate urged her to stay. The party was hopelessly ruined. Justin didn't know what to do. He hadn't expected this from his mother. Kate cried, threw a tantrum, and reprimanded her fiancé. Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you tell your mother off? She embarrassed my mom. She bet on money. What a bunch of relatives. You're like that too, aren't you? Tell me, why did you marry me? To mock me? Do you think I'll stay in your house after this? Thank you, my love. I'll remember this holiday for a long time. My mom was right when she told me not to get involved with your family. I didn't believe her. I thought you really loved me. Justin was panicking. His greatest fear was that Kate would run away on a nervous breakdown and ruin his wedding night, and she was all he'd ever dreamed of all along. The boy was really angry with his mother for this prank and was completely on the side of the bride. He hugged Kate and said, "You know what? Let's run away from here right now. Everyone's looking at us funny." I've got a hotel room, the best suite I've ever had. Let's not let anyone ruin our day, sweetheart. And I'll talk to Mom later, I promise. I swear I had no idea she'd do something like that. Otherwise, I would have stopped her. Well, you saw for yourself, even Dad didn't know. I don't know what got into her. We'll move into a rented flat. It's okay, we can live without our parents' million. We'll manage on our own. I'll get a job. We'll get by. Don't be scared, kitten. I love you and I'll never leave you. And we'll help your mom. Don't worry. Kate breathed a sigh of relief, wiped away her tears and hugged herself to her husband. Thank you, darling. You're the only one who understands me. I also think that not in money happiness. The main thing is that we love each other. Love can overcome any difficulty. I'm so lucky to have you, my love. Their first wedding night was passionate and hot. Justin enjoyed it. He had achieved what he wanted and was flying to the seventh heaven with happiness. But that's where the beautiful fairy tale ended. The guy quarreled with his parents, packed his things and announced that he was leaving to live in a rented flat. Mrs. Linda just laughed. It was part of her cunning plan, too. It was going as well as it could, she replied sharply. Fine, son, you're right. Only you're a husband now. You're going to provide for your family. You're fired from our firm. You already have your diploma. Do it on your own. Give back your father's car, too. If you want to live like an adult, then go for it. I'll see how long it takes you. Don't shame me. Those poor people didn't give a penny for the wedding, so let them share the flat. You've decided to put all your poor relatives on my father's and my neck. Money doesn't fall from the sky, by the way. We put so much effort and nerves to achieve prosperity. After her son left, Mrs. Linda's husband William clutched his head. Linda, what are you doing? You're going at it like a tank. Why are you trying to take this poor teacher's home away from her? I mean, she's had it rough enough. She's barely fighting off her illness. Why are you trying to take away her rundown one-bedroom? You're humiliating the girl for nothing. She's a good girl. She loves our dummy. And Justin's changed so much with her, he stopped clubbing. He's got his head on straight. What's wrong with you? It's like you've got a demon inside you. You're trying to do something. I don't get it. Of course you don't. Linda looked at him. You've always been a nobody yourself. If it weren't for my dad's assets, you'd still be in your marketing department. And Justin will thank me for it. I'm sure he'll come running back. I mean, he's used to being on his own. I'm going to get the Pattison girl ready. We've been wanting to be related to them for a long time. Compared to our company, they're a giant. There's nothing to compare. Cynthia's a blood and milk, fashionable as a doll, good-looking girl. What's this one? No face, no skin. All she does is babble in her French. What a bunch of intellectuals. The couple moved to a rented flat with no repairs, but it was cheap. An adult family life began. Kate, as before, worked in the library, was preparing to defend her diploma, had time to take a couple of students, and ran to her mother, comforted her. But Justin was having a hard time. I had to get a job as a manager in a shop. It took an hour to get to work by metro, and the schedule was inconvenient. I had to get up really early, and the pay wasn't very good to begin with. It turned out that you had to buy absolutely everything for your family, not only food, but all the household chemicals, plus rent and utilities, and there was no money in the purse. This made the guy very angry. He was not used to living like that. He wanted to go to a prestigious restaurant for dinner like he used to, instead of eating fried potatoes, or buy a brand-name shirt, instead of a cheap one from a sale. Kate didn't seem special to him anymore, and French was no longer necessary. The husband became irritable, snappish. Sometimes he'd get drunk out of desperation. He was afraid to imagine that he would have to spend the rest of his life so dull and boring in poverty. He didn't even realize that most of the population lived like that. He'd had it easy, and the news of Kate's pregnancy really pissed him off. Why are you so irresponsible? I thought you were on the pill like everyone else. I mean, what's a baby now? We're barely surviving on our own. Go get an abortion before it's too late. We'll have a baby later when we're back on our feet. And anyway, I'm sick of this life, to be honest. And pasta and potatoes too. I want marbled beefsteak and baked trout like I used to. I'm used to comfort, don't you realize? Kate was crying and trying to get through to her husband. What are you saying, Justin? Do you want me to get rid of our baby? Are you out of your mind? Why do you keep complaining like a child? Everything's wrong with you, like you're working hard. I didn't think you'd be so weak. Did you say you loved me? All young families go through hardships, and then there's mom's duty, and time is running out. Doesn't your mother have any conscience at all? She realizes we can't pay off that much in 4 months. I see you don't care that your mom might be homeless. You're only thinking about yourself. You're a selfish mummy's boy. Justin's pissed. You know what? You go back to your mom and I'll go back to mine. I've had enough of being a family man. I've had enough. I'm not ready to raise a child, you know that. I don't even want to imagine him screaming around the clock. How much money do you need for all this? This is the end. You'd be stuck with him. No privacy. So don't be daft, go to the hospital. I'm sorry, Kate, but this is not the life I wanted. So we're getting a divorce. I'm a young man, I want to live life to the full, not to be a deadbeat. Your mom's good too. She shouldn't have borrowed if she couldn't pay it back. She put herself in debt. Don't put other people's debts on me. So the couple separated. Kate was living with her mom again. Also from the library had to quit, she was there temporarily, and the former librarian came out of maternity leave. The situation was critical. If she didn't pay off the debt, they would be left without a home. Kate cried and looked for vacancies. Then she came across an advert. A rich family needed a nanny for a child with knowledge of French. Kate called and was given an appointment for an interview. She was met by an elderly gray-haired man with a neat beard. He talked to Kate for a long time and finally said, "We have, an unusual situation. My grandson has been disabled since birth and is homeschooled. He's recently taken up French on his own, so I decided to get him a teacher. But you realize you need a special approach to such children. I don't know if you can handle it. You're young and probably not very experienced. Kevin is not a contact boy. He's not easy to deal with. I can't hide that. Let's do it this way. I'll hire you for a month, so to speak. A trial period, and I'll pay you very well, and then we'll see." Kate agreed immediately, without hesitation. "I agree. I will try to find an approach to your grandson. I need the money badly. We also have an unusual, difficult family situation, but I'd rather not discuss it." So Kate started working at the Costner house. It was a huge mansion with 3 floors, except there were hardly any people in it. There was the owner himself, Mr. Henry, his son Andrew, also a businessman who was hardly ever home, and his grandson Kevin, a sickly boy of 6, and no women except the cook and the maid. A strange family, Kate thought. There was a sort of gloomy aura about the place. Everyone walked quietly, talked softly, as if some tragedy had recently occurred in the house. But Kate decided it was none of her business, and set to work with enthusiasm. Outwardly, Kevin did not differ from the other children, except for the fact that he was in a pram, very modern and maneuverable. Shoot face, fashionable haircut, expensive clothes. Except that the look was not childish at all, but something prickly, tenacious and even hard. The look of a tired adult. At first it was difficult. The boy was too withdrawn and did not make contact, even though he was interested in French. He listened to the lectures willingly, but as soon as Kate tried to draw him into a dialogue, even in the form of a game, immediately shut down and gloomy. The girl realized that she couldn't get very far in that mode, so one day she said to Kevin, eye to eye, "Look, I can see you're a very clever boy, and you have abilities. But for some reason you stubbornly do not want to communicate with me. Tell me, do you dislike me that much? Or maybe I've offended you in some way. If that's the case, I'll leave. I can't. It's like banging my head against a wall. If we don't get along, classes will have to stop." The boy turned away and frowned. Kate sighed and decided to leave. It wouldn't work. Suddenly, when she reached the threshold, the boy started to cry and shout. "You're as bad as my mom. Aunts are all bad. I don't trust anyone. You're all liars." First you pretend to be good, and then you hurt me." Kate instinctively drew back, as if she'd been stung by nettles. Everything inside her turned upside down. She realized the boy had finally burst through. It was like a boil that had matured long enough to burst. Kate put her arms around the boy. He tensed, but did not resist. Surprisingly, she stroked his shoulders and comforted him. "Kevin, sweetheart. What's wrong? Tell me. It'll make you feel better. You poor thing, how bad is it for you? Not all ants are bad. Believe me, people are different. I too have been hurt and hurt many times. But I won't get angry, because they're good people, and you should be friends with them. I'll tell you my biggest secret later, but don't tell anyone, okay?" The boy became quiet and began to talk as if to himself. "I love my mom so much, more than anyone else in the world. But she doesn't love me. She left us. And she also shouted to Daddy that she wouldn't live and suffer with an invalid, that it was unbearable. Now I feel so bad, and Dad feels bad without her. But she doesn't care. She's fine without us. I don't trust anyone now, and I won't love anyone either. Why was I born like this? I'm a freak. I'm the cause of everyone's problems. I don't even have any friends. None of my kids come to see me. So be it. I don't need anyone." He covered his face with his hands and cried bitterly, angry with himself. Kate was shocked. Poor little boy, he was only 6, and he had already suffered so much grief. She took his hand. "Do you want me to be friends with you, help you with your studies, and go out with you? We'll talk about everything. Don't be mad at Mom. Adults often do stupid things. Maybe she'll realize how wrong she was and come back. Things happen. But Grandpa loves you very much. I can see that. And your daddy too. And you need to socialize with the other kids. But that's okay, we'll figure something out. Now, listen to my secret. I'm gonna have a baby soon. But no one can know about it. Okay? I'll keep your secret and you keep mine." The boy thawed out, and now he was eager to study. He picked up everything quickly. By the end of the week, he had learned his first poem. The landlord was delighted. He didn't even expect Kate to linger in their house. I mean, the boy had never liked anyone before her, and now such a success. Grandson not only made progress in learning a foreign language, but also studied with pleasure. Now walked in the yard with Kate. They played and talked a lot. It was as if the child had been replaced, as if he had come out of a deep freeze and revived. Mr. Henry called her into his study and praised her. "Mrs. Kate, I admire you. You're a born teacher and apparently a psychologist. You managed to melt my grandson's heart. That's a month's pay with a bonus. And I'd also like to sign you to a 1-year contract. You're a perfect fit for us. Tell me, what is the secret? How did you manage to achieve such success?" Kate sighed and replied, "There is a secret. I promised Kevin that I wouldn't tell anyone about it. It's just that he and I became friends. That's all. He's a wonderful boy, smart, intelligent. He just needs a lot of female attention and nurturing. I don't know what to tell you about the contract. I've grown very fond of Kevin, to be honest, and I'd love to keep working for you. But you know, my family situation is complicated. I have a debt to repay. There's only a week left. If we don't pay it off, we'll lose our flat, and then I don't know how we're going to live. And as much as we're trying to save, we're only a third of the way there. I'm sorry, it's my own problem." Mr. Henry became wary and questioning. "Kate, I'll tell you what, frankness for frankness. I'll tell you what happened in our family and why Kevin became like this. And you share your grief, and maybe I can do something to help." The man leaned back in the soft chair and began to tell the story of his family. "I loved only once in my life for real. When I was young, I had a passionate affair with a girl, Elizabeth, and we wanted to get married. We made such plans, but my parents did everything they could to stop it from happening. We had to break up. I got cold feet, I showed weakness, and I went along with my family. I left Elizabeth and married the partner's daughter, Anne. I wouldn't say she was a bad woman. She was a good mother and a good hostess. But we were complete strangers to each other, and so I lived without love for many, many years. You should know what an unbearable torment it is to lie down and get up with a man you don't love at all. Your whole being rejects him, and you have to pretend to be a good husband, My son Andrew has become my rock. I turned my attention to him. I was relieved. But still, my wife couldn't take it. We divorced. It was a relief. There were no scandals, no arguments. We just let each other go. My wife went abroad. She has long ago another happy family, and I am truly happy for her. And my son stayed with me. He wanted to stay with me. True, he went abroad to study with his mother. It was time for him to fall in love. I did not like this Ingrid immediately, shallow and swaggering. She was only interested in money and wealth. She didn't even want children. And when she did get pregnant, she didn't change at all. She drove like crazy, wore corsets so her belly wouldn't show. She could drink champagne. Her son scolded her. Sometimes he locked her in her room, waiting for her maternal instinct to kick in. I do not know whether the birth was hard or her lifestyle so affected, but Kevin was born with a spinal abnormality. The doctors said it was unlikely the baby would walk. They even said no. They said, "Why do you need such a burden? Give birth to another normal, healthy child." Andrew was against it. How could they leave their own child in distress? They took Kevin home. The boy grew up so affectionate, so clever. He was drawn to his mom, like all children. But Ingrid, would you believe it, didn't like him at all. She even disliked him, thought he was a burden. He annoyed her. She could of course play with him a little for the sake of appearances, that's all. My son argued with her, and I talked to her. No use. Indifferent, not a mother. The child, of course, felt his mother's dislike. He was offended, couldn't stand his parents' scandals. And a year ago, Ingrid told her son that she had a lover for a long time. She divorced and went to live with him. And Kevin called a worthless invalid and his mistake, shouted that it was necessary to abort. And the grandson heard it all. After she left, Kevin was so different, so withdrawn. He started screaming at night, crying. It was like he went blank. We didn't know what to do. So you literally saved us. Such is our sad family history. As they say, the well-to-do suffer too. I would give my entire fortune without hesitation, if only my grandson could get back on his feet. But, alas, that's impossible. Kate didn't lie. All honestly told, and about the operation of Mom, and the debt, and the meanness of her mother-in-law, and the betrayal of her husband, their separation, and the pregnancy. She even cried when she remembered everything. Everything inside her clenched. Kate worried that now Mr. Henry wouldn't take her on as a full-time employee. Why would he do that? The man suddenly stood up, went to the safe, opened it, and calmly counted out the required amount, handed it to Kate with the words, "That's enough. Today, give every penny of it to your mean mother-in-law. Take the note and never do business with that family again. No, I'll go with you. I've known scoundrels like you. We need to put this matter to bed once and for all. I'll still expect you at work. Pregnancy is not a problem. We'll figure it out," he said firmly. Kate cried and didn't know how to thank him. She couldn't believe this ordeal would end today. A complete stranger had helped her so easily. "Thank you so much, Mr. Henry. I owe you a debt of gratitude. Don't think I'll work every cent of it. I was so afraid my mom and I were going to be foreclosed on. I couldn't sleep all night, and my mom blamed herself for agreeing to go into debt." The man started to get dressed. "Stop it. It's no big deal to me. You realize you don't owe me anything. I'd be happy for you to keep studying with Kevin. That's all I need from you. What's it going to be? Less talking and more doing. Let's go." As the huge sub pulled up in front of the Smith's house, Justin was startled. He wondered who it was and who it was for. And when he saw Costner, a well-known businessman and philanthropist, on the doorstep, he opened his mouth. Next to him stood a frightened Kate. Seeing his spouse, the guy was completely confused. He certainly did not expect such a thing. She did not say hello and said, "We're at your mother's. Call her, please." Mrs. Linda, seeing her daughter-in-law, wanted, as usual, to attack her and throw her out. But when she saw Costner, she immediately began to ingratiate herself. "Good afternoon, Kate." "Hello, Mr. Henry. What an honor. Come in. Why are we standing on the doorstep?" But the man interrupted her and said sharply, "Here's the entire amount owed. Bring the receipt here. And remember, if Kate or her mother have any more trouble with you, you'll have to deal with me personally." and I'll make sure that your piss-poor factory disappears from the horizon. Is that clear? How could you not be ashamed to do such a thing? Don't you have a guilty conscience? Or do you think it's okay to profit from other people's grief?" Mrs. Linda handed over the receipt and remained tensely silent. There was nothing to say. Justin was ready to fall to the ground, too. Mr. Henry tore up the note and nodded to Kate that it was time to leave. They left in silence without saying goodbye. Justin was very nervous. "Mum, what was that? How does Kate know Costner himself? I'm in shock. What's going to happen now? Everyone's heard about his violent temper. What if she complains to him that I left her pregnant? He could get us in so much trouble. We'd be in a lot of trouble." Linda's husband couldn't take it either. "I told you, Linda, don't do wrong to others. It'll come back to you. She's a good girl. She's got her own protector. Now she can't stand anything. And you, Linda, and you, son, are going to get us in trouble. Why did you have to hurt people like that?" The woman was pacing back and forth, angry. "Yeah, I underestimated that quiet librarian. What a setup she gave us. I told you, son, our pretty girl's a slut. She's already got Costner fooled, even though she's pregnant. Don't hesitate and propose to Prokhorov's daughter as soon as possible. Maybe then everything will be all right. Her father is also a powerful man. Why are you bothering me with that daughter? I don't like her at all. There's nothing to talk to her about. All she talks about is fancy clothes. She hasn't read a single book. Maybe I shouldn't have gone looking for Kate. I saw her today, and I knew I loved her. My mom gave me a hearty wave of her hand. You're the one who ran away from your rented flat. Am I missing something? You cried that you didn't want to take out pots and pay off other people's debts. And now what? You're playing the love game again. Don't be silly. Marry Prokhorov's daughter. You'll live well. You'll forget your librarian in no time. You're just like your father. You're nothing like her." Kate was happy and called her Mum. "Mummy, we're free. Mr. Henry, the man I work for, has sorted it out and paid off our debt. We owe him now. But don't cry, Mummy. For dinner. Why didn't I think of that? I'll invite you. Mum wants to invite you to dinner. She wants to thank you. We live modestly with her. We're no match for you, but my mum cooks very well." The businessman smiled. "Why, lunch? Why not? Let's go. It's been a long time since I visited good ordinary people. I'm so fed up with all this high society, only smiles on their faces, but nobody knows what's inside. You can't trust anyone." Elizabeth was very worried. For the arrival of important guests, she prepared delicious rastagai, warm pies and salad. She even baked a charlotte. She dressed up, put on a pretty colored dress instead of a home dressing gown, combed her hair nicely. At last her daughter arrived. She shouted from the doorstep, "Mummy, it smells divine, already drooling. Come, I'll introduce you to Mr. Henry, our savior." The woman went out into the corridor, only looked at the guest and turned white, began to gulp for air. "Henry Costner, is that you? I can't believe it. My God, you probably won't remember who I am, Elizabeth. Elizabeth Morris. You don't remember?" The businessman was also confused and mumbled, "How can I not remember you, Elizabeth? You haven't changed at all. Only you've become more beautiful. My God, what a meeting. I can't believe it. Oh, wait. So Kate is your daughter. How old is she? Come on, Elizabeth, don't be silent." The woman just stared at him silently. Tears were streaming down her face. Henry understood and kept repeating, "I have a daughter. Kate is my daughter. Elizabeth, why didn't you tell me then? I didn't know you were pregnant." Kate was shocked and tried to find out what was really going on. "Do you two know each other?" "Mom, I don't understand. Mr. Henry, are you really my father? Will someone please explain something to me?" "Mom, you said Dad's been dead a long time. How could he be?" All three of them sat down on the sofa in the room. Elizabeth drank a glass of water in one gulp and began to try to explain everything to her daughter. "Yes, Kate, this is your birth father. What could I have told you as a child? That your daddy abandoned me, that he behaved just like your gutless Justin. Would you have liked that truth? I loved you for a long time, and then I hated you, and then I forgave you, but I never expected to see you again. Anyway, thank you for saving me and my daughter just now. We were on the brink. So, Henry, you're going to be a grandfather soon. Kate's pregnant. Her husband was a bastard. But that's okay. We'll be able to raise the baby on our own. We're not used to the hardship. What now? Come on, let's eat before it gets cold. I'll go set the plates. I can't get over it. What a meeting. But Kate didn't seem to hear. Mum. She kept looking at Henry. They do look alike. They have the same ears. She was hesitant to say the word daddy, as if there was something in the way. The man couldn't stand it and hugged her first with the words, "Forgive me, my daughter, that you grew up without a father. It's really only my fault, but I'll make it up to you. Let me be there for you, help you with everything. So you and my Andrew are brother and sister on your father's side. And Kevin's not a stranger to you either. He's your nephew. Oh yeah, maybe that's why he's instinctively drawn to you. It's not for nothing that you two hit it off so quickly, is it? Tell me, Dad, why didn't you look for my mom when you divorced your wife? We live in the same town. You told me yourself that you loved her very much. Weren't you interested? How she lived, how her fate had turned out." Henry lowered his head. He was ashamed. It was a thought, really. But I thought that Elizabeth must have started a family long ago. A husband, children. What would I say if I found her? I'm such a bastard, don't you think? I was ashamed to show my daughter in front of her. And then the business, family troubles and problems with my grandson, almost all my time occupied. It's not much of a personal life. I'd really like to apologize to your mom, Kate, but I'm afraid she won't forgive me. I've hurt her too much. Then Kate took her father's hand and said, "You try it, Daddy. I saw Mom's eyes when she looked at you, still loves you. And besides, if she didn't love you, she'd have married long ago. She's been alone all her life." After this unexpected meeting, everything in the life of both Kate and her mother went differently. The girl worked for her father almost until the birth and devoted all her time to her favorite nephew. And she also helped Kevin to find many friends with the same problems not only in the country, but also abroad. Now Kevin was not alone, he corresponded a lot. At the same time, he improved his language. He also went twice a week with Kate to a rehabilitation children's center. The girl also found information about him on the internet. After all, live communication is extremely important for a child, and nothing can replace it. There the boy was engaged with specialists, psychologists, masseurs. He played with other children. Finally, the child was liberated, stopped clamping down, and no longer felt inferior. Andrew warmly accepted his newfound sister and was always happy to see her. He was eagerly awaiting the arrival of the little new member of their family. Henry, on the other hand, was slowly trying to mend his relationship with Elizabeth. It was not easy. The woman was afraid to trust him again, for he had already betrayed her once. Eventually, however, her heart shook, and the old feelings between them flared up again. The woman blossomed. She felt as she had when she was young, happy and in love, as if those years of separation and hard living had never happened. Henry and Elizabeth kissed frantically, like schoolboys, in secret under cover of night, at their once favorite spot, under a lilac bush that still smelled of lilacs, and laughing. "Henry, what are we doing?" The woman blushed. What if one of the pupils were to pass by and see a French teacher in his old age doing obscenities? How embarrassing. The man held his beloved even tighter and whispered, "I don't care. I won't let you go anywhere else, and I won't give you to anyone. Do you hear me, Elizabeth? Stop torturing me. Come with Kate to my place. A wise and caring mistress is sorely lacking there." And Elizabeth agreed. For all these years she had dreamed of a large family, and now the whole family was living in the Costner mansion. Kate was already pregnant, funny and clumsy. Her father and brother were so worried, ran around her, fed her all sorts of delicacies. At this very time, the Smith family was in turmoil. Mrs. Linda kept trying to marry her son to Pattison's daughter, but Justin grew more and more gloomy by the day. He flatly refused to go on another date with Samantha. This calculating, arrogant girl didn't just annoy him, she pissed him off. There was too much of her everywhere. She spoke loudly out of turn, laughed, behaved swaggeringly and self-confidently, could offend a waitress in a restaurant, make a scandal in an empty place. Everywhere she tried to emphasize her superiority over the others. Justin involuntarily remembered his quiet and intelligent Kate, her tender poems about love in French, her tact and excellent upbringing, how he wanted to hug and kiss her tenderly again, to let her ruffle his hair as before. The boy regretted 100 times that he had chickened out then, frightened of difficulties, and hid behind his mother's back like a little child. It got to the point where Justin called his current girlfriend Kate several times in a row. She also caught him looking at pictures of her on his phone. A major scandal broke out and the relationship ended. The mother was outraged and screaming, and the father sighed. I knew it would end like this. Listen to me, son. I've spent my whole life indulging your mother and doing her bidding. I stopped being myself a long time ago. Is that how you want to live your life? But if you still love Kate so much, have the courage to go and ask her for forgiveness. She's going to have a baby any day now. Don't you even care about your own child? Everybody makes mistakes, but it's never too late to admit mistakes and make things right. And don't take it out on your mother. You're not a kid anymore. It's time to make your own decisions. Kate's desperate cry in the middle of the night rattled the whole house. Her water broke, and she went into labor. Mom frantically called for an ambulance. Dad shouted, I'll call a taxi. I reckon it'll get my daughter to the hospital quicker. And her brother Andrew was holding her hand and saying, Hold on, sister, it's only a little while. My poor baby, is your stomach hurting bad? It'll be all right. Dad's already made arrangements with the doctor, he's just rung him. He's on his way. Kate was so pleased that everyone close to her cared about her. She tried to hold on and even joked, but in fact she was very scared. After all, it was her first birth. How would it go? She was taken to the hospital, and the whole family was waiting in the corridor, praying that everything would go well. Suddenly, Justin walked into the foyer. He looked guiltily round and asked everyone, How's Kate doing? How long has she been in the gym? What do the doctors say? I'm sorry, but I can't do this without Kate. I love her. He was a fool. Elizabeth was indignant to the extreme and replied sharply, Have you no conscience? Time's up. Your mother put me and my daughter in debt. You disgraced Kate when she was pregnant and threw her out of her rented flat. You've been living on your own all this time, scared of the hardship. Do you know how she cried? How she suffered? She couldn't believe you betrayed her like that. And now that you've found Kate a rich father, you've come to prove your love. Get out now. The boy stood there red with shame, but he wouldn't leave, trying to justify himself. You're right about everything. I was following my mother's lead, and I won't leave until I ask Kate's forgiveness. I don't need anyone but her. If she drives me away, then I'll go. Mr. Henry took Elizabeth's hand and said, Don't interfere, Elizabeth. Please. He's a father. Whatever it is, he has a right to know what's wrong with his child. Let the young people sort it out for themselves. It's up to them whether or not to reconcile. But I'll tell you, Justin, as Kate's dad, if you ever think of hurting my daughter again, I will destroy you. Do you understand? Learn to be a man and take responsibility for your actions. It's a good thing you came to your senses in time. I did something stupid like that once, and it ruined my life. All night, Kate's relatives did not find a place and worried. What took so long? It was only at lunchtime the next day that they received the good news. The nurse, smiling, said, Who's the daddy? Justin cheerfully exclaimed, I'm a daddy. How's Kate? What's wrong with the baby? What took you so long? Did something go wrong? The woman calmed everyone down. Everything's fine. First births are never quick. You have a boy, 3,200 and a full 50 centimeters, healthy and everything is fine. Someone alone can visit her. Just put on some booties and a dressing gown. Elizabeth went to go, but Justin beat her to it. Please let me in. It's very important to me." Justin entered the cozy toll room. An exhausted Kate lay on the pillows, her hair stuck to her forehead. There were circles under her eyes, and a small man who looked like a shriveled old man was sniffling beside her. The woman saw Justin, and her heart sank. Everything mingled: resentment, the desire to scold him and throw him out, and the joy of motherhood, and the desire to share that joy with the child's father. Justin approached Kate and sat down beside her. He stroked her blonde hair as before and begged her. "Forgive me, you fool, I beg you. I know I'm a bastard, a weakling. You can scold me, you can even hit me, but don't hurt me, please. I'm a coward, but I love you. I don't need anyone else but you. I promise you. Can I hold our son in my arms, if you let me? My God, he's so tiny. It's scary." Kate nodded. Justin took the baby reverently, his hands trembling. A lump came to his throat. How tiny and defenseless he was. The way he wrinkled his nose and wriggled his hands. It was like an explosion inside the boy. He was filled with joy and pride. This is his son, his flesh and blood. And he almost lost everything. The man spoke softly. "Well, Sonny, will you forgive the fool daddy? I promise I'll make it up to you and Mummy, and I'll never betray and abandon you again. Oh, my darling, my darling." Kate looked at them, and tears rolled from her eyes. The offense was gone. She realized that in her heart she had already forgiven Justin, that she still loved him, and that she would very much like to raise her son with him. The young parents sat together for a long time, unable to talk enough. Then Kate nursed her son. They decided to name him Michael, and Justin kept looking at them and nodding. They made up. Justin left the ward completely happy. He told everyone that Kate was fine. What a wonderful son he had. Elizabeth was crying. Happiness. It's crazy. I've become a grandmother. Everyone decided to visit Kate tomorrow when she had some rest and recuperation. Justin stomped to the door. He had to leave and he didn't want to go home. His legs wouldn't obey him. Mr. Henry understood and said confidently, "What are you standing there for, son-in-law? Come with us. We're going to celebrate Gregory's birth. I hope you're moving in with us now." "Or what?" "I mean Kate and the baby. I'm not letting your family go." Justin was so excited and immediately replied, "Yeah, sure, I'll go with you. I'm just going to go home and pack. Don't worry, I've come to my senses. I've got my head on straight, I'm working. I'm going to take care of Kate from now on. Thank you for giving me another chance. I'll do better. I promise." There was another row at home. Mrs. Linda, as always, threw mud at Kate and didn't want to let go of her only son. But this time Justin, probably for the first time in his life, showed character and resolutely replied, "That's enough, Mom. I love Kate, and I had a son. Do you hear me or not? And I'm going to live with her whether you like it or not. And I want you to know, if you get in my way, I don't have a mother anymore. Yes, remember, you already had a grandson, and instead of being happy, you're cursing everyone. Why are you so angry, Mom? You're just looking for advantage everywhere. You're not from high society yourself. Our late grandmother, your mom, was from the country, and you grew up there, and now you divide people into poor and rich. And you're dragging me into it too. I won't go along with you anymore. You've ruined everything. I'm very happy that Kate forgave me, that she gave me a second chance. I'm not going to miss it. I feel sorry for Dad. He's not happy with you. Why do you have to ruin everything? Do you enjoy ruining the lives of people you care about? Stop it before it's too late." Justin slammed the door and left home for good. He was determined to make his own life and destiny. After he left, Mr. William drank his brandy in silence. Shot after shot, he too had made up his mind to do what he had always feared most. He shouted in his wife's face, "You know, Linda, fuck you. Justin's right. You've ruined our lives. We're getting a divorce. And I'm leaving you too. You're not a woman anymore. You're unbearable." Mrs. Linda was stunned. Her husband had never allowed himself to do such a thing. She watched him shoving his things into his suitcase for a few seconds and still couldn't believe what was happening. Then she started to laugh. "William, don't make me laugh. Where will you go? What can you even do without me? You've never made a single independent decision in your life. It's all me. And mind my company. In case of divorce, you'll be left with nothing. And who will need you, old Romeo? Don't mess around, go to bed." To her surprise, her husband didn't raise an eyebrow. He took the suitcase in his hands and waved his hand. "Take everything and choke on it. I'll file for divorce myself. I'm free at last, I can't believe it. I'm going to a friend on the sea, to Michael Anderson. He's been asking me for ages. And you go on torturing someone else. You've got no family left. Goodbye." William left, and Mrs. Linda wandered around the empty mansion like a mad woman. There was chaos everywhere, things strewn about. She was crying and laughing hysterically and shouting, "Well, fuck you all, traitors. I'm all for you. You'll all be sorry." After Gregory was born, Kate and Justin decided to move into her mom's flat. They renovated the place and started living separately. Justin insisted on it. It was important for him to prove that he is not a weakling, not wimpy, that now everything will be different, so that Kate believed him. The guy really tried, made a career little by little, learned to solve family issues and take responsibility for everything. In his son, he had a soul. He helped Kate to bathe, and rock, and walk, and scolded himself with the last words that once did not want this wonderful baby, and insisted on an abortion. Corrected text. Kate was happy. Her son was now growing up in a complete family. They often took Cav into their house, and he enjoyed fiddling with little Gregory. William bought a small house on the coast and now hosted his son and his family in the summer. He tried not to think about his wife and lived for the sake of his son and grandson. Mrs. Linda, after the departure of her relatives, could not recover. It only seemed to her that her husband could do nothing, but in fact it was his efforts that kept the company afloat. Without him, the woman was unable to keep the business going on her own, and soon it went bust. She completely lost interest in life, wandered unattended, in pajamas in an empty mansion and drank wine, trying to forget. It seemed terribly unfair to her that everyone had turned their backs on her, that neither her son nor her husband would answer the phone, or even want to hear her voice. This feeling of being unwanted wore her down and literally made it impossible for her to breathe. And yet she never repented, never realized that it was her own fault, that everything that was happening to her now was payback for the evil she had done to her loved ones. Gregory was growing up. Kate got a job in her field and was now doing what she loved, teaching French at school, as her mother had once done. Justin had become a department deputy. He was proud that he had achieved the promotion himself, not because he was someone's son. Now they had a family tradition. On weekends they took their son to his grandparents' house and took leisurely walks in the park. Kate recited marvelous poems in French to Justin, and he admired her as before, and they were so happy together. In her hurry to meet her fiancé's rich parents, Amélie stood up for the old woman, and when she crossed the threshold, Amélie flew home in tears. It was raining, she was soaking wet. The smart sundress, which the girl wore in honor of the solemn occasion, clung to her body. Her hair hung in dull strands along her face. Amélie did not even think to look for shelter. On the contrary, it was even better you could not see the tears streaming down her cheeks. You'd think they were raindrops. Oberon, how could he? Those eyes of his, the timid gaze he carefully hid from her. The man Amélie had long considered the bravest, the most reliable and loving, was almost hiding behind his silent father's back. But the mother of the family was not stingy with her expressions. No, she talked a lot that evening. The target is close at hand. The outline of a large mall, which is only a 2-minute walk from the house, is already visible in the distance. Wow. It took Amélie about half an hour to get from the center. She would have waited longer for the bus, that's for sure. That's what resentment does to people. Amélie didn't even notice she'd gone about 10 or 12 kilometers. Amélie stopped. No, you can't go home like this. Mom would be there, she'd start asking questions, worrying, and it's not good for her, even dangerous. Mom. Somewhere in Amélie's stomach an unpleasant cold ball moved. Mommy has a very bad heart. The disease progresses with age, especially lately. Mommy needs to avoid unnecessary worry. So Amélie will go to the mall now. She'll dry off a little, have a cup of coffee in the food court, sit, recover, and then put on her face one of her trademark complacent smiles, and only then will appear in front of her parents. Emily, from childhood accustomed to take care of her mother. Many times the girl witnessed her attacks. Sometimes her mother was even taken to the hospital, and not yet an adult Emily was left for several days or even weeks alone under the supervision of neighbors, of course, but still, Emily and her mother had no relatives to look after the girl. They were alone in the whole world. Once Emily learned that her mom was forbidden to give birth at all. Overheard a conversation between the parent and a friend. Then the girl, of course, asked Jane's mother questions. She at first refused, tried to change her daughter's mind. And then she confessed. "Yes, they told me," she said. "They warned me. But their predictions were wrong. They didn't believe I was carrying you at all. They predicted I'd be dead by midterm." "So how did you decide?" "I thought, why should I live if I can't have you? You were already with me, living under my heart. How could I ever get rid of you? No, it's the best decision of my life." Amelie sometimes felt guilty because it was because of her that her mother was in such a state. But her mother, noticing it, even got angry with her daughter. "Don't think about such things. I wanted a child myself. How could you influence my decision? Think about it. I wanted to have a daughter like that. And I'm happy I went against all odds. And I was right, by the way. Yeah, well, my heart's racing. Where's the guarantee that it wouldn't have happened without the birth? I've had it since I was a kid anyway. Doctors used to say I'd die during pregnancy. Then they said I wouldn't survive labor. Then they assured me that my child would end up in an orphanage at the age of 2 or 3. So what do we really have?" Mother often repeated Emily that the daughter the most priceless gift that made her life. That it is a great happiness to have such a wonderful child. She also sometimes talked about Emily's father, and the girl understood that her mother loved this man very much, although she knew him only for a short time. They met by chance, ran into each other in New York on the Brooklyn Bridge. A handsome young man had come to the Big Apple for a student conference, and his mother, then still future, of course, Amelie, had gone on vacation for the first time in her life. She had recently graduated from college, got a job as a dressmaker in an attire, and began to make a good living for those times. So she saved up for a year for a trip. Young people immediately liked each other. They walked together for a long time on the picturesque streets of New York, sat in cafes. The student turned out to be so intelligent and interesting conversationalist that the young girl listened to him, holding her breath. Then they went to his room right that same evening. Both thought that this was just the beginning of the relationship, but fate had ordered otherwise. They agreed to meet at the monument at lunchtime the day after the guy finished another semester. But the girl then never waited for her lover. At first she thought that the student deceived her, but how he looked at her with admiration, gently held her hands. No, it didn't seem to be true. The eyes could not lie. And then the girl went to the hotel where the young man was staying. There it turned out that the students were urgently taken away to some military training camp, exercises or something like that. So he just couldn't come to her. Couldn't get away. That's how we got lost. Amelia's mom sighed with a sad smile as she told her daughter the story. There were no social networks then, so it was impossible to find each other in the vast country. We didn't have time to exchange addresses. I searched for him. Tried to find out information about his city or university in that very hotel. They refused. It's confidential, after all. I'm sure he tried to find me too, but at least I still had you. And how could I turn down such good fortune? Amelie took a seat at a table that was hidden behind a column. She didn't want people looking at her right now. They flowed through the upper floor of the mall in an endless stream. There were couples in love among them. Young people were hugging, smiling at each other, just like she and Oberon, who had recently been happy. But of course it was not certain that this happiness would last long. Not at all. The smiling waiter brought Amelie coffee and wished her a good day. The same friendly in appearance, but in fact indifferent. He doesn't care at all what Amelie's day will be like. It's just his job. The only person in the world who cares about the girl is her mother. Her health is deteriorating. After all, until tonight the girl had hoped that Oberon would too. Oberon loves her too. He had told her that more than once, hadn't he? He was lying. Amelie sipped the hot, fragrant drink with pleasure. A blissful warmth spread throughout her body. It even felt a little lighter. A little. Maybe it wasn't so bad after all. I'd shown my true colors today. It would have been much worse if their relationship had gone further and gotten more serious. And then he'd show her his true colors. But it couldn't get any more serious than that. Amelie thought he was about to propose to her. Why else would he suddenly ask her to meet his parents? Isn't that a sign of seriousness? Amelie was a recent college graduate. She also became a dressmaker like her mother. She loved it from a very early age. She, as a very young girl, sewed outfits for her numerous dolls. She liked to think up interesting models, select materials. The process itself also gave the girl pleasure. It is a miracle there was a piece of fabric or a few pieces. And now this shapeless something turned into a wonderful dress, which makes any doll a princess. Mom worked a lot, so the girl was often left alone at home, left to herself. But she was never bored, sewing and distracted and entertained and gave pleasure. Mom, coming from work, sincerely admired her daughter's creations. She even took these mini masterpieces Amelie in her attire and showed her colleagues. But no fashion designer from Amelie, of course, did not come out. She finished college after high school and got a profession of seamstress, and now worked in an atelier near her home. She loved her work. In her hands, everything went well. The bosses praised the young, talented employee. No one could so virtuoso as she adjust the outfit to the figure. Over time, she was entrusted with the most difficult cases, and the girl coped with them on the hurrah. She even liked difficult tasks. She saw them as a challenge. Amelie ordered herself another coffee. She needed to warm up. She didn't want to get sick and infect her mom. There was no way she could be sick. Amelie had recently done the almost impossible, arranged a consultation with a distinguished professor of cardiology. And it's completely free. Soon her mother will be examined by the best specialists in the region, and perhaps they will choose a treatment scheme that will ease the condition of a woman who is not old yet. Mom is just over 40, and yet like a 100-year-old woman she chokes when she walks, and her shelf in the bathroom cabinet is filled with batteries of medicine bottles. All of this made Amelie sick and very scared. Oberon somehow distracted the girl from these sad thoughts. A switch. By his mere existence, it was as if he lived in some other world. The son of wealthy parents, flitting through life like a carefree moth, meeting friends, traveling, partying. Always smiling and cheerful, he seemed to infect others with his optimism. Oberon is also, of course, handsome, tall, athletic, correct facial features, wide white-toothed smile, charming dimples on his cheeks, and eternal bronze tan on his body. Oberon often traveled with his parents. Even in winter, they flew to the ocean, where they sunbathed and splashed in the turquoise waves. Oberon also dressed stylishly and tastefully. He looked like a guy from a fashion magazine and could easily have been a model. But he had very different plans for this life. Oberon was studying at a prestigious economics university. When he and Helene first met, the guy was just finishing his penultimate year. Ahead was a difficult but interesting year, state exams, writing a diploma, graduation, and then work for his father, a well-known local businessman, owner of a network of car services. What could be in common between this bright representative of the golden youth and a poor girl, recently graduated from college and working as a seamstress? But they had a fateful meeting in a nightclub. Emily had never been fond of such places. For one thing, it was expensive. To visit this club, she spent half of her salary, which was irrational in her situation. But Susie, her childhood friend and neighbor, had asked, literally begged Amelie to keep her company. Susie had always dreamed of a beautiful life and planned at least for one evening to plunge into the atmosphere of an expensive nightclub. She had even bought a dress for the occasion. How could Amelie refuse? Amelie immediately did not like the fact that the table was occupied, and Susie immediately rushed to the dance floor. Amelie recognized her friend's silhouette among the dancing crowd and wondered, what is there to like here? The music is so loud that it seems that my eardrums are about to burst. It's stuffy, cramped, smoky. Well, since I'm here, I'll have to stay with my friend until the end. We can't leave her alone. Amelie put on her favorite tight jeans and a wide flowing top. And as it turned out, she was the one who had guessed the right outfit, not Susie in her dressy dress. Almost all the girls in the club were dressed about the same as Amelie. Not a ball at all. A couple of times she managed to get her friend out on the dance floor. "Did you come to sit here?" Susie asked. her eyes blazing with joy. And Amelie danced among the crowd of young people. Yes, it was certainly nice to relax and let the sound waves take over. At one of these moments, Oberon came up to her. He simply stood beside her and began to dance, copying and complimenting Amelie's movements. The girl, noticing this, was embarrassed, stopped, but he smiled at her in a friendly manner, took her hand and led her in the dance. Amelie spun so deftly and confidently that the two of them seemed to become one. It was an incredible sensation. During the dance, the girl looked at her unexpected beau. Handsome, incredibly handsome, stylish and dressed very expensively. Amelie had an excellent understanding of things, because she worked in an attire. The young man was wearing clothes of expensive brands. How did such a guy even pay attention to her? Perhaps the dance would end, he would smile and leave to his equally rich friends. He probably just liked the way Amelie danced. So he paired her up for a few minutes. But Oberon didn't leave. He asked for permission to walk Amelie to her table. And since there was no one at that table, as Susie continued to conquer the dance floor, the young man offered to keep Amelie company. Wow. Amelie's heart was pounding like a jackhammer. She couldn't believe that a guy like that wanted to hang out with her. That night, they tried to talk honestly, but the loud music was getting in the way, making it almost impossible. Still, Auburn managed to shower Amelie with compliments that she had never heard from him before. "You are very beautiful and plastic. You have simply beautiful eyes." As soon as I saw them, something in me immediately turned upside down, Auberon said, looking directly at Amelie and looking very serious. The guy clearly wasn't joking or being sly. He was saying what he felt. Amelie was confused. Previously, she had only heard compliments about her undoubted talent for sewing. The girl did not consider herself beautiful. At school, the boys did not pay attention to her, noticing only the classmates with more prominent forms. What about Amelie? Skinny, tall, angular, who would look at such a thing? There were no guys at college and no guys at work. So this was the first time Amelie had ever received such delightful compliments that made her head spin. Of course, she fell in love with Auberon at once. In her mind, he was the most beautiful guy in the world, except she didn't believe anything was possible between them. Too different. Auberon asked Amelie to leave him her phone number. Amelie dictated the numbers. The young man saved her number and asked her to do the same with his. Auberon then escorted both friends in a cab home. Svetka tried to flirt with the young handsome man all the way. She, heated by drink and vivid emotions, did not immediately notice that Auberon clearly sympathized with someone other than her. The guy very delicately repelled these attacks, trying not to offend Svetka. With this, he conquered Amelie even more. What a sensitive alert. Before parting, Auberon kissed Amelie's hand. It was obvious that he wanted more to hold the girl against him, maybe even kiss her on the lips. Amelie felt it, but the boy held back and limited himself to an elegant gesture. Still, Amelie didn't believe that Auberon would call her back. The next day was a day off, and Amelie didn't have to go to work. Since the morning, she had been in suspense. On the one hand, she wanted Auberon to call, she wanted to feel the same feelings as yesterday again. On the other hand, Amelie was even a little afraid of it. What if during the day Auberon would be disappointed in her, would notice some flaw that was invisible in the light and music, would find her boring, would realize that they were not the same? See the disappointment in his eyes? That would be painful. Auberon called and said he'd pick Amelie up in an hour. He suggested a trip to the city ponds, a walk in the park, to get to know each other. He added that he couldn't think of anything else but their meeting yesterday. Amelie was very nervous about this date. She tried on all the outfits, choosing the best one, even applied light makeup, which she almost never did. Amelie wanted to hide her excitement from her mother so as not to worry her, but she noticed. Going on a date, she asked with a smile. Amelie nodded. "I'm so excited for you. I hope it's a good one. Just be careful." "Okay, don't worry, Mom. We're going to a crowded place," Amelie assured her parent. The fact that in this crowded place she would go in the car of an almost unknown guy the girl did not mention. Why bother her mom? She cannot explain and prove that Auberon is definitely a good man and will not do anything bad. Her mother had not communicated with him, had not seen his eyes, and I don't think it's possible to put it all into words. Amelie, of course, did not know much about cars, but when she saw Oberon's foreign car, she was stunned. She immediately realized that it was a very expensive model. A dark blue, glossy, streamlined car. The carriage as served Oberon smiled from the driver's seat. Amelie braced herself and got into the car. Despite the huge difference in wealth, Oberon behaved with Amelie simply and sincerely, joked with her, complimented her, asked her questions about her life and told her about himself. Gradually, Amelie relaxed. Oberon is so natural, so intelligent, so sweet. He's nothing like the Majors, the spoiled sons of rich parents. And stop living in stereotypes. All people are different. They took long walks in a beautiful park with fountains, fed the ducks, sat in outdoor cafes, laughed and talked. It feels like I finally met a kindred spirit. Oberon shared his impressions. You're so real. I've never met anyone like you before. What are the others like? Artificial or something? Amelie smiled. Exactly artificial, exclaimed the boy. That's a very accurate word. They see in me only a purse and a pleasant appearance. With you, it's completely different. These words made Amelie's heart warm. It made her feel good to know that she was special to Oberon, not one of many. Yes, that leaves you with nothing but sympathy, the girl joked. I guess I've been hanging around in the wrong circles. Oberon smiled, looking warmly at his companion. Their romance resembled a fairy tale. Amelie had never dreamed of such a thing. The girl loved paperback novels, but never thought that one day she would practically be the heroine of such a read. Here's the revised text. Oberon made Amelie surprises, showered her with compliments, took her to the most interesting and unusual places in the city that she didn't even know existed. He sincerely enjoyed her reactions, surprise and admiration. Are you so easy to please, so easy to surprise, he sometimes said. It's such a pleasure. I feel like a completely different person around you. I can't even express it. Oberon liked very much the sincerity of the unspoiled Amelie. And the young man often reminded her of how beautiful she was. Showed photos of famous models and actresses similar to her. Gave Amelie things that emphasized the advantages of her appearance. Oberon took care of Amelie. He tried to please and protect her. It was so pleasant. The girl was beginning to feel like a real princess, beautiful, fragile and loved. She had never thought of herself that way before. Of course, her mom noticed the changes happening to her daughter and knew her boyfriends. But they didn't know each other. The woman asked her daughter questions about her chosen one. When she learned that the man was very rich, she tensed up a bit. Be careful, daughter. After all, rich people choose their life partners as equals, and with the rest they just have fun and spend time, she said. What's with the stereotypes? Mom, Amelie argued. Of course, my mom doesn't understand anything. It's not like she doesn't know Oberon, doesn't see the way he looks at me. Oberon isn't like that. And anyway, it's the 21st century, and you're still suffering from some relic of the past. I just don't want him to break your heart, the woman said, shaking her head and looking anxiously at her daughter. So what's the bottom line? Did Mom turn out to be right after all? Time goes on. Nothing changes. Could it be that at first Oberon was really enchanted by Amelie? She really wasn't like his previous girlfriends. Modest, unspoiled, hardworking. No whims. Obedience and admiration. Amelie, in an effort to please Oberon, adjusting to his wishes, often agreed with his opinion, even if she herself thought otherwise. She wanted him to be happy with her. But of course there could be no future for them together. Then they were simply blinded by feelings. The girl refused to accept that fact. Amelie and Oberon were together for almost a year. The relationship between them became more and more serious. The girl could no longer live without her. Lover. He also wanted to spend as much time with her as possible. Only he didn't have as much time as he would have liked. Oberon was finishing his last year of university, and he often went to the sea with his parents. From warm lands, the guy invariably brought his beloved interesting jewelry, bright souvenirs, exotic outfits. The girl missed him. Someday I'll show you all this beauty. You will look very cool in a white swimsuit against the background of ocean waves, Oberon said. When I graduate, I'll announce to my friends that I have a fiancé. Really? That sounds a lot like a proposal deferred in time, but still, of course, a fiancé. Oberon nodded. And what are you against it? I thought. It goes without saying that we would be married soon. Now it is true is not the time yet, but the event is just around the corner. Amélie simply put her arms around Oberon, snuggled up against him, and closed her eyes. She felt truly happy. As such, Oberon had not proposed to her. There was no ring, no discussion of a wedding. It was simply implied from that very dialogue that they would get married sooner or later. Then Oberon got his degree. His father got him a job, as had been implied from the beginning. The boy started earning decent money. He used to be sponsored by his parents, which he never hid. Now the guy was rapidly becoming financially independent, which he was very happy about. Amélie rejoiced with him and dreamed that now he will finally make her an offer. But for several months after the defense of the diploma, the proposal did not follow. But one day Oberon said that it was time for Amélie to meet his parents because their relationship is very serious. So the family is eager to communicate with the chosen one of the only heir. Do you think it's necessary? Amélie clarified. She was very anxious about meeting Oberon's relatives. Family had always been very important to him. The girl knew it and was afraid to disappoint her parents and her beloved. Of course I will. Well, what are you worried about? Everything will be fine, answered Oberon. Amélie, as always, immediately unconditionally believed the words of Oberon because he then still seemed strong, reliable, decisive. If her lover said that everything would be all right, then it would be so. The meeting was scheduled for Friday evening in one of the most luxurious restaurants in the city. Amélie looked at the photos of the atmosphere of this place in social networks and began to worry even more. She always felt uncomfortable in such interiors, although Oberon periodically invited her to such places. But then it was Oberon himself, and this time she would have to interact with his parents. There was no telling how they would feel about her. On the other hand, even if her mother and father didn't like her, it wouldn't affect their relationship. He is already independent and grown up. He makes his own choices, decides everything in his life. Oberon had emphasized it many times, so Amélie's happiness was not at stake in this situation, but still wanted to please the parents of her beloved, so that in their future family reigned peace, harmony, warm relations. About the upcoming meeting, Amélie preferred not to tell her mother Helene, or she would definitely get excited, and she cannot. Recently, the health situation of Amélie's mother was getting worse. The very young woman was sick. She was often dizzy, her heart was aching. She could barely get to work, stopping at every pole to catch her breath. The doctors would throw up their hands. What do you want? You have a serious defect. They told you not to give birth. You didn't listen. The disease progressed rapidly. We are not gods and cannot work miracles, said the doctors at the hospital, where Amélie's mother went now almost every week in the hope of getting a new effective treatment. She always got the same answer. But nothing. Soon there will be a consultation with the professor, about which Amélie had agreed. This luminary of medicine will definitely help them. Amélie decided to take the trolleybus to the restaurant. She had no money left for a cab. It was still a week away from payday. The lion's share of her earnings had been spent at the beginning of the month on medicine for her mother. So what if it was a trolleybus? Amélie even liked to ride it across town and look out the window. She sometimes specially chose long routes to admire the city scenery and think about her own. But this time the girl certainly didn't manage to relax. She was constantly winding herself up with anxious thoughts. There was uneasiness in her soul. Intuition told Amélie that the meeting is unlikely to go smoothly. And as it turned out later, her instincts had not failed her. The salon was almost empty. Rush hour was long past. Amélie leaned her forehead against the cool glass and tried to calm down, but nothing worked. Maybe I shouldn't have worn this sundress. It's a nice, decent length below the knee, but the shoulders are too open. Wouldn't Oberon's parents find my outfit vulgar? Maybe I should have gone with a light business pantsuit. But I'm not going to the office, am I? Amélie's thoughts were interrupted by a squeal and a shout from the conductor. Isn't it a shame to ride public transportation as a hare at that age? The girl looked in the direction of the sound. At the far end of the cabin near the driver's seat, an ugly scene was unfolding. The conductor in an orange vest, a bearded woman with her hair highlighted with cheap dye, loomed over a dry old woman. She was huddled in her seat, clutching tightly with her hands a shabby bag full of something, and staring at the conductor in a huff. "I explained to you, my dear, I'm going to my grandson's hospital," came a trembling old man's voice. "I spent all my pension on a present for him. Do you understand?" "No." "Well, what's the pity? If I drive quietly here a few stops, the cabin is still empty. And if it's full, I'll get out of this seat and stand in the corner." "I won't take the seat for nothing. Whether it's empty or not is none of your business," objected the old woman. "You have shown up," the conductor interrupted her. "It should not concern you, but you are only supposed to pay for the ticket. Be kind and pay the required amount. If I let everyone ride for free, they would stop paying my salary. Pay up or get out." The old lady kept saying about her grandson Andrew, who was hospitalized and needs a transfer, which is carried to him by a caring grandmother. There are medicines, food, some other things. The elderly woman tried to get through to the conductor, grabbed her heart, and seemed ready to cry. But the controller remained adamant she demanded from the elderly passenger money for the fare, otherwise offered her to leave the cabin. Amelie suddenly felt very sorry for this old woman, who was so eager to see her grandson. Maybe there really is no one else to come to the person. It's not a big deal what kind of situation people are in. The toll is not that great. Of course, Amelie was far from being rich, but she would definitely have such a sum for a good deed. The old woman's eyes were so full of despair and fear. No, Amelie simply could not, like the other few passengers, indifferently watch this scene. "I'll pay for this, grandmother," Amelie said, and handed the conductor some change. The conductor gave Amelie a ticket with a scornful glance at the old woman. The girl immediately handed it to her grandmother and wanted to return to her seat. But the rescued passenger grasped her hand with her dry and unexpectedly strong palm. "Thank you," said the old woman fervently. "Thank you for your good deeds. Don't think I'm not a beggar. I have some pension. I've worked at the factory all my life. Well, this month I'm in trouble. Grandson Andrew had an accident. I had to buy him everything. I'm taking him to the hospital," said the old lady. "There's no money left at all. You give me your phone number. I'll transfer it to you when the money comes." Another surprise. It turns out that this old woman knows how to use mobile banking. A modern grandmother. "No, not at all," Amelie shook her head. "I won't be poor." The girl was adamant that it was a small sum for her. And the old woman, it is immediately obvious, is in a difficult financial situation. All the way to the hospital, the old woman thanked Amelie and told her about her grandson Andrew. By all accounts, he was a very decent young man. Grandma was worried about him. After the accident, he was in the hospital with injuries. But she was glad that her grandson got off relatively easy. "The wounds will heal. They won't go anywhere," said the talkative traveling companion. "The main thing is that his head is in order." Amelie nodded with a smile. And then the old woman got off at her stop, and the rest of the way the girl traveled in silence. This traveling companion distracted her a little from her anxious thoughts, relieved her excitement. But as soon as Amelie was alone, the anxiety returned. Now, sitting at a table in the cafe, drenched by the rain, Amelie mentally reprimanded herself. She should have listened to her intuition and not gone to this meeting. Now she clearly realized that nothing good could come out of it. She saw the whole situation, but a few hours ago the girl was full of hopes for a happy future together with Auburn. The luxurious atmosphere of the restaurant, of course, added to the girl's excitement. Amelie immediately saw the table where Auburn and his parents were sitting. When he noticed her, he smiled and moved towards her, embraced her, stroked her back, complimented her on her appearance. All this, of course, cheered Amelie up a little. Next to Auberon, she always had a sense of security. As it later turned out, false. Auberon's parents looked pretty much as Amelie had imagined them. Her father was an athletic, trim man with elegant gray hair on his temples, tanned, handsome. The same dimples on his cheeks as Auberon's, the same clear features. It was clear at once who the son resembled. The mother is a well-groomed woman who is, of course, a frequent visitor to beauty parlors. Smooth face with perfect skin, flawless manicure, regal posture, her gaze. The cold stare of light blue eyes. Amelie felt as if she'd been hit by an icy shower when she looked into them. Basically, at that moment, she finally understood everything on an intuitive level, but she hadn't yet realized it with her head. The hope for a favorable outcome was still alive. Well, hello, lovely young ladies, Oberon's father said without a smile. Hello, the girl smiled broadly. At last we have met you. Oberon's mother stretched her lips into the semblance of a polite smile, but her eyes remained serious and cold. Everyone introduced themselves and the waiter brought the order. At first the conversation went on about nothing. The weather. City news. Amélie periodically inserted her lines, trying to be a full participant in the conversation. After each of her remarks, Oberon's parents looked at each other meaningfully. Amélie watched their reactions carefully. And so did Oberon. He watched his parents' faces, trying to read their emotions. At that moment, the young man looked like a small child rather than an independent, attentive adult, and Amélie didn't like that very much. Then the conversation turned to Amélie herself. Tell us a little about yourself, asked Oberon's mother. Our son takes you very seriously. It is not every girlfriend he introduces to us, although of course this is not the first time this has happened. Oberon is a man in love. Nevertheless, I'd like to know more about you. Amélie was disgusted by the not the first time. She was clearly being insinuated that she was neither unique nor one of a kind, but one of many, and the tone of this richly groomed woman was hostile. There was a metallic note in her voice. Well, Amélie told me. Oberon's parents asked her clarifying questions from time to time. Who was her mother? Where was her father? What does Amélie herself do for a living? What educational institution did she graduate from? The girl's answers elicited strange reactions from these people. They looked at each other, grinned. It was unpleasant. Oberon sat next to his mother and remained silent. He did not even try to somehow diffuse the atmosphere and help his girlfriend. Why college? Oberon's mother asked. You probably did not do well at school. You did not get into the university. Amélie let the barb pass her ears. The lady was obviously trying to hurt her and make her emotional. She wouldn't. Amélie did well at school, even very well. She had to get a profession, get a job. The financial situation of their small family was very precarious, but she couldn't explain it all now. The conversation was becoming more and more unpleasant. The questions and remarks of Oberon's parents became more and more personal. It was as if they were turning Amélie inside out. The girl talked about herself and for some reason was ashamed of the facts of her biography, although she had never done anything bad to anyone. But Oberon's mother managed to masterfully humiliate Amélie's story about herself. The girl felt herself at this table, next to these people, a beggar and a limited dullard who did not have enough intelligence for university. A poor girl who dreamed of becoming a rich heiress and thus solving her life problems. Or maybe that's what she really was. Amélie, under the icy gaze of the unfriendly woman, suddenly realized that she had really counted on Oberon's help in treating her mother. Oberon didn't utter a word. He didn't even look at Amélie, moving closer to his father. And so it was as if the young man hid behind his mother's shoulder. He was humiliating Amélie. Oberon didn't even try to stand up for her. It was unlike him to make the girl even more confused. Oberon, he was always on her side after all, supporting her, cheering her up. But now the guy looked like a little boy who was afraid to cause disapproval of parents. And that's when Amélie realized it all. No, there would be no future for her and Oberon together. His parents were now making that very clear to their son. Their aim wasn't even to humiliate Amélie. They were demonstrating to their only heir that a girl seamstress, living alone with her sick mother in a tiny apartment, he is not a match. And the son had learned his lesson well. Oberon will never go against his parents' wishes. He's too dependent on them. All his success and prosperity is due to his father. Amélie's feelings and her worries were completely irrelevant to these people. The girl felt like a textbook. Oberon's mother was not at all worried that such treatment could cause psychological trauma to the girl. She didn't care. The main thing was to show her son the fallacy and absurdity of his choice. Apparently, the meeting itself was conceived for that very purpose. Amélie felt tears coming to her eyes. Why should I be like this? What have I done to these people? She thought. In fact, Amélie had never done a single thing in her entire life that she could be ashamed of. The girl got up from her seat. I understand. I have to go, she said. I don't want to burst into tears in front of this family. No, I won't give them that pleasure. Amélie hurried out of the restaurant. No one tried to stop her. The girl hoped, still hoped, that Oberyn would rush after her. "Oh, come on. He loves me so much, after all," as he has said more than once. But Oberyn stayed with his parents. Emily burst into tears on the street. It was good that it was raining, and it was not visible to others. She didn't wait for the trolleybus, she walked. Movement always calmed her down. It was raining like a bucket. Amélie's light sundress immediately soaked through and clung to her body. Pedestrians hid under awnings to wait out the downpour. Amélie wandered down the road, not even noticing the discomfort. She wasn't in that state. Oberyn. How could he do this to me? I had confidence in the man. Rejoiced that I was so lucky to meet my soulmate so early in life. Turns out I made it all up on myself, Amélie thought. Oberyn was only interested in the girl as a curiosity. He was used to meeting with spoiled princesses, and here was a modest girl who had not seen anything bright and interesting in her life. Perhaps it was pleasant for him to feel like a patron, opening the world to the poor beauty. But he had no special feelings for her. Otherwise, Oberyn would not have sat there like a statue while his mother humiliated a defenseless girl in front of his eyes. And now Amélie sat in the mall, sipping one cup of coffee after another. Her hair was almost completely dry and now curled beautifully. Her sundress had also become dry, and Amélie had recovered enough that she could now show herself in front of her mother. She would behave as if nothing had happened. It may be dark at heart, but her mother must not notice it. Mama must be taken care of. She's the only person in the world who truly loves Amélie, and probably always will be. Men, they're probably all like Oberyn. They can get a nice buzz on your ears and then they're off when they've had their fun. Perhaps her father was the same. Perhaps her mother is hiding something from her. Or maybe she just doesn't realize that the boy she once fell madly in love with has run away from her. Amélie came home and went straight to the bathroom. "Did you get caught in the rain?" asked her mother, who was lying in the bedroom holding her heart. "Yes, I'm soaked through," she smiled nonchalantly. "I want to take a hot shower so I don't get sick. I'll make you some tea." "No, you lie down and rest." "I'll do it myself," Amélie replied. In the shower, Amélie cried some more. Tears this time brought relief. The bad emotions went away with them. Amélie tried very hard to behave as if nothing had happened. But her mother noticed the change in her daughter. It was impossible to hide anything from her attentive gaze. "Have you quarreled with your Oberyn?" Mama asked. "How did you realize it?" Amélie was surprised. "First of all, you don't go out anymore. It's hard not to notice. And secondly, your eyes have been very sad lately." "We broke up," Amélie nodded. "He turned out to be a regular mama's boy. It's a good thing I caught it in time. He didn't hurt you." "No, not at all. I just saw that he was a mama's boy. I don't want to be around that kind of guy." "Yeah, well, I was upset, of course, disappointed. But it's okay now. That Oberyn I fell in love with, he didn't even exist, you know. I just made him up. That's what I'm sad about. But I'll be smarter from now on." Amélie smiled broadly, showing her mother that she was doing well. Although, of course, the girl was still in pain. Her dreams of a happy life next to the man she loved had been shattered. Amélie still longingly remembered that former Oberyn, who existed in her imagination before that meeting in the restaurant. She thought she had met the perfect man, and then suddenly it turned out that such a man probably didn't exist at all. It hurt so much. Oberyn's parents, especially his mother, had humiliated her, not hesitating to express themselves and not caring a bit about her feelings. If Oberyn had at least tried to protect his girlfriend, to support her, Amélie wouldn't feel so devastated now. But alas. Amélie tried to live her old life, working, going out with her friends, reading a lot to distract herself. She was now constantly cleaning the apartment. The house shone with cleanliness, but the soul did not become clear and clean. And then there was that long-awaited appointment with Professor Walshian. We went to the clinic with my mother. The professor turned out to be a tall, thin old man with shrewd blue eyes. He carefully familiarized himself with the history of the heavy patient. He did not say anything, but ordered some additional tests. All the necessary procedures were carried out in the same clinic quickly, promptly, without cues. The professor himself took Amélie's mother around the rooms. The girl rejoiced, "Wow, what an attentive attitude." In the local clinic, This was not even close. As it turned out, the professor was in a hurry for a reason. He, as an experienced physician, immediately realized that the case is bad. The situation is critical. After all the examinations, the trio returned to the office. The professor was ready to pronounce his verdict. "Well, I have nothing to please you," he waved his hands. "I can't even believe that this is the result of the examination of such a young woman. The heart is worn out. It barely works. Medication won't help. We have to operate." Amelie clutched her mother's hand, who was listening attentively to the doctor's every word while remaining calm. "The operation should have been done a long time ago. I don't understand how your doctor could let the situation get so bad." The professor sounded clearly annoyed. "You can even try to sue him. But that's after. Now the main thing is the operation." And then the professor told the details of the upcoming operation. It was complicated, very complicated. Not every cardiac surgeon would do it for a patient in this condition. It is necessary treatment in New York, and this is travel, accommodation, payment of expensive medicines. And the operation itself cost a fabulous amount of money. When the professor announced the amount, Amelie shuddered. She and her mother simply have nowhere to get such a sum, except to sell the apartment and to be on the street. But even so, still real estate so quickly cannot be realized, and we need the money now. "It must be done as soon as possible," said the professor, seriously looking at the confused visitors. "Literally every day counts." "What will happen if we don't operate?" Amie's mother asked. "I just can't imagine where to get such a sum of money. Is drug therapy possible?" "No," the doctor answered immediately. "No medication will help you. Only surgery." "What are we going to do?" Amelie whispered. She could hardly fight the tears that were coming to her eyes. All the previous worries about disappointment in Auburn suddenly seemed to her a complete nonsense. Here it was, the real trouble. "And what to do about it, I don't know." "Try to apply to a charitable foundation," advised the professor. "They open collections for treatment. They help many people." The doctor ran his fingers over the keyboard in search of the necessary folder. He found what he was looking for and printed out a sheet with a list of charitable foundations. "We'll find the money. We'll make it work," Amelie told her mother in a confident tone. Every free minute, the girl now monitored vacancies. She was ready for anything to go on shift to the north, to respond to dubious advertisements offering obviously illegal activities for relatively good money. But the girl quickly realized that this was not the way out either. Until she gets a job, until she works for a couple of months to be able to apply for a loan, precious time will be lost. And she would not get into trouble herself, not to run into scammers. Most of the ads that promise golden mountains look too suspicious. And if something happens to her, how will mom survive it? Who would help her? Amelie was desperate. She sobbed every day out of helplessness, secretly from her mother. She, on the other hand, seemed surprisingly calm. She seemed to accept her fate and did not even try to do anything, realizing that it was useless. One day, Amelie took the desperate step of turning to someone who had no one else to turn to. So she dialed Oberon. Yes, they hadn't communicated all this time. Oberon hadn't called, hadn't written, hadn't even tried to apologize for his behavior at the restaurant. It seemed that he was quite satisfied with the fact that Amelie herself evaporated from his life, less problems, a mountain off his shoulders. After everything that had happened, the girl despised Oberon, considered him a mama's boy. Even his very name irritated her. She deleted all the photos of them together, so that she wouldn't accidentally stumble upon them in her phone. Those pictures hurt her over and over again. She was so happy in them, so in love. And she had no idea what lay ahead of her. But anyway, only Oberon could help her. He's wealthy, he doesn't count money. Perhaps he would lend her the necessary amount, even with interest, just to get the money for her mother's operation as soon as possible. Amelie will never get such a loan, her solvency is too low, but she will try to work wherever she can, as soon as possible, to pay off the debt. Amelie is not afraid of work. Here's a list of funds that really help, not scams, he said. Amelie grasped the list like a drowning man grasping at straws. On the way home, mother and daughter were silent. Each was thinking about something else. The woman was making a difficult choice for herself to fight or leave everything as it was, because the forces in this battle were too unequal. Amelie was frantically searching for a way out. She saw no other way but to fight for her mother's life to the last. When she got home, the first thing the girl did was to call every charity on the list. Amelie hoped they would help. She was sure of it, but no one wanted to help. Amelie got different answers to her appeal. Someone immediately said that they specialize only in sick children, as if adults do not get into difficult situations or less want to live. There were also inexplicable refusals without a clear explanation of the reasons. And only in one place Amelie was explained the essence. You see, the woman who answered the phone explained in a guilty voice, "Your situation is not too spectacular. Everyone feels sorry for little children and transfers money to them. Well, they also help fathers and mothers of the kids so that the kids don't remain orphans, especially mothers. You have a woman, your mom, an adult, working. Her daughter's all grown up. So no one's going to the orphanage, if anything. There's almost no chance that they will respond to the request." Amelie was grateful to her interlocutor for this hard, but the truth. At least now it is clear why all the foundations refuse them. It means that it is necessary to look for other ways out of the difficult situation. Relying on funds is only a waste of time. "Let's put the apartment for sale," suggested the girl. "Cheaper, so that sooner a buyer will be found." "What are you?" sighed the woman. "The operation, it is not known whether it will help or not. And you, if anything, without your corner will be left. And how will you live?" "No, let things go as they are." "No?" Amelie exclaimed. "No, don't even think about it." Aliena felt the prospect of losing her mother frighten her to the point of convulsion. Sure, it wasn't easy to dial Oberyn's number, but it was for her mother's sake. If it hadn't been for her illness, Amelie would certainly never have contacted her failed fiancé. Oberyn answered at once. His voice sounded a little surprised, but there was no guilt or remorse in it. Oberyn spoke to Amelie as if nothing had happened, as if a former classmate had suddenly called him. "Hello, how are you?" the guy asked politely. "Not so good," Amelie admitted. "I hope you're not going to start telling me about your upset feelings now. I just don't like that kind of thing. What was is what was. It's over and done with. We move on." "It's not about upset feelings," Amelie sighed. "You see, my mom, she's very sick. I told you, remember? Her heart." "I remember something like that." "So what's the next step?" "Well, the next thing is she needs surgery or she's going to die." "I'm sorry. It's sad. I hope she's going to be okay." "The problem is, it's not free. It costs a lot of money. We don't have that kind of money, and there's nowhere to get it." I see Oberyn grinned. "Wow. My mother is a visionary. She warned me that this would happen, didn't she, Amelie? Well, she said that once the fish was off the hook, you'd try to get your money another way. True. Mom thought it would be a heartbreaking story about your own illness or the news of your sudden pregnancy. But you brought your mother into it." Amelie was taken aback. Did Oberyn really think she was just trying to screw him for money? Had he learned nothing about her during the time they'd been dating? How could Oberyn say something like that? It's hurtful, painful, hard. Unfair reproaches and accusations of mercantilism hurt her soul. But Amelie pulled herself together. She can't show weakness now, she can't take offense. Oberyn is her last hope. "Look, Oberyn, it's all true," she began in a persuasive tone. "I can show you the certificates, the professor's conclusions, the price list of the clinic," Amelie said convincingly. "It's all easy to make up, isn't it?" The boy bent his mind. "The professor will call you himself. I'll ask him." "Hey, you're kidding me." "Yeah, that call could be made by anyone. You got a sucker." "Oberyn, but it's true. I can prove it. Besides, I'm not just asking for a huge sum of money. I'll pay it back. I'll pay it all back. I'll write you an IOU. I'll pay you the interest and the debt. My main thing is to pay for the operation as soon as possible. They won't give me a loan. My official salary is too small." "Then how are you going to pay back the debt? You said yourself you can't afford the loan." "I'll work day and night. I'll work hard. But I need the money urgently right now." "That's a heartbreaking story," grinned Oberyn. "It's a pity such talent is wasted. You could write novels easily, couldn't you?" "I'm sick of it," the boy said sharply. "I'm sick of listening to this nonsense. And at first I still felt guilty that everything turned out this way. You seemed to me a naive and sincere girl, and now I see that my mother was right. I accurately predicted your behavior. That's it. Don't call me again." The phone rang with short beeps. Amelie dialed Oberon's number again and again. She just couldn't convey to him the seriousness of the situation. She should explain it better. He would understand. But Oberon seemed to have blocked her number. That's all. Her last hope evaporated like dew on a hot summer's day. Amelie had no idea who else to turn to. Oberon had trampled and humiliated her again. He's made it clear that he thinks her ex is a fraud. He won't even talk to her. How could he? Tears spurted from the girl's eyes. She couldn't, and didn't want to hold them back. How often had she been crying lately? Amelie was outside, right at the bus stop. Good thing there were no other people around, but what did it matter? Amelie slumped helplessly on the bench, wrapping her arms around herself. She shuddered, her whole body shaking violently. Amelie could do nothing about the condition. It must have been hysteria. She was tired of fighting, tired of knocking on every door and getting rejected everywhere. And then there was Oberon. She had to turn to the man who had once trampled and humiliated her. And he did it again. But most importantly, Amelie was never able to help her mother. Seeing life slowly leaving a loved one day by day was unbearable. Her mother was weakening before her eyes. She didn't even go to work anymore, sitting on endless sick leave. The boss threatened to fire the woman. Who needs such an employee? And what a job. Amelie's mother could hardly move around the house, and she was still so young. And Amelie, a grown-up daughter, can't help her own mother. If it wasn't for her, Mom would be feeling much better now. Vaughn and the professor also said that pregnancy and childbirth finally undermined the woman's health. Large tears ran down the girl's cheeks, and her sobs made it hard to breathe. Amelie could not pull herself together, and then a car stopped right in front of her. It stopped and stopped. No big deal. Maybe it was just a ride to the stop. It happens. Amelie tried her best to calm down so as not to scare people. Yes, somewhere the glass opposite the driver's seat slowly rolled down. Amelie met her gaze with attentive gray eyes. It was a young man, a little older than she looked. He was looking at the girl with undisguised interest. She kept sobbing, unable to calm down. "And I told you there was something wrong with her. I noticed it from afar," came an elderly voice from the back seat. The man turned to the invisible passenger and nodded absent-mindedly, then turned to Amelie. "Young lady, what's wrong with you? Do you need help?" No, Amelie objected. She suddenly felt ashamed that she was sitting there crying in front of everyone. People were stopping because of her. Amelie couldn't help it. It must have been hysteria. She was tired of fighting, tired of knocking on every door and getting rejected. And then there was Oberon. She had to turn to the man who had once trampled and humiliated her. And he did it again. But most importantly, Amelie was never able to help her mother. Seeing life slowly leaving a loved one day by day was unbearable. Her mother was weakening before her eyes. She didn't even go to work anymore, sitting on endless sick leave. The boss threatened to fire the woman. Who needs such an employee? And what a job. Amelie's mother could hardly move around the house, and she was still so young. And Amelie, a grown-up daughter, can't help her own mother. If it wasn't for her, Mom would be feeling much better now. Vaughn and the professor also said that pregnancy and childbirth finally undermined the woman's health. Large tears ran down the girl's cheeks, and her sobs made it hard to breathe. Amelie could not pull herself together, and then a car stopped right in front of her. Yes, somewhere the glass opposite the driver's seat slowly slid down. Amelie met the gray, attentive eyes. It was a young man, a little older than she looked. He was looking at the girl with undisguised interest. She kept sobbing, unable to calm down. "And I told you there was something wrong with her. I noticed it from afar," came an elderly voice from the back seat. The man turned to the invisible passenger and nodded absent-mindedly, then turned to Amelie. "Young lady, what's wrong with you? Do you need help?" No, no, Amelie objected. She suddenly felt ashamed that she was sitting there crying in front of everyone. People had stopped because of her. They were going somewhere on their own. Maybe they were in a hurry, the man continued. No, don't be embarrassed if someone has offended you or something has happened. Then the back door of the car opened and an old woman stepped out. A light pantsuit, gray hair arranged in an elegant bundle. This old woman bore little resemblance to the old lady in the handkerchief on the trolleybus who couldn't find the fare, and yet it was her. Amelie recognized her. What a coincidence, smiled the old woman. It's not a small town. What were the chances of them meeting again? And yet they did. Agatha, I know you, the old woman smiled warmly. Andrew, this is the girl from the trolleybus. Remember, I told you who paid for me when I went to your hospital. The man got out of the car too. Now both grandmother and grandson stood in front of Amelie, whose tears had dried from surprise. Of course I remember this story. The young man smiled at his grandmother, and then looked at Amelie. Imagine I was in a minor traffic accident. I was taken to the hospital overnight just to observe. I didn't even want to tell my grandmother. It's just that a friend of hers works there as a nurse. So I blabbed. Well, and Grandma dropped all her affairs, bought on the remnants of the pension to me food and medicine for a year ahead and rushed to the hospital, said Andrew with a slight irony. Here you are again ironizing. The old woman looked reproachfully at her adult grandson. But you'll understand me when you raise a child from infancy and put your soul into it. Then we'll talk about unnecessary worries and anxieties. Amelie was pleased to watch this friendly altercation. Kind, caring, sensitive people who obviously love each other very much. And for some reason I thought on the trolleybus that your grandson was a boy, or a teenager, Helene confessed. For me, he is always small, even though he is already under 2 meters tall, and has long provided for himself, smiled the old lady. What's the trouble with you? She turned to Amelie. Honey, you do not be shy, tell me. You're a kind girl. You help me then. You are not indifferent. Maybe we can do something to help you. Amelie sighed. How could these people help her? She was faced with unsolvable problems too difficult for her. And no one in the whole world could help her. Nevertheless, the girl suddenly realized that she really wanted to share her trouble with someone. Andrew and his grandmother will listen to her, that's for sure. And at least sympathize, pity. Amelie suddenly realized that all the time she had been hiding her worries from others. Even with her mother, she could not share her innermost feelings, because she had a heart condition, and she should not worry. And here they are, potential listeners, sitting next to each other, asking to open their souls. And that's exactly what Amelie needs right now. So how will you finally tell me what happened to you? The old lady asked again. And you do not hurry, said Amelie. My story is not too short. We are in no hurry, the grandmother and grandson said together. All right, Amelie nodded her head. But I suggest that we settle somewhere nicer, said Andrew, looking around. There seems to be a nice pizzeria over there. How about it? I'm in. Immediately responded the old woman. Me too, Amelie nodded, frantically trying to figure out how much money she had left on her card. Cozy atmosphere, stylish furniture, pleasant music. The interior of the pizzeria was conducive to conversation. Andrew, despite Amelie's objections, paid for the order himself. The company settled down at a table, hidden behind racks of fresh flowers. Now tell us about your trouble, the old woman smiled, and we'll think together how to help you. Good, Amelie nodded, still puzzled as to why these people would listen to her, let alone help her. So what if she paid for an old lady on the trolleybus? It's nothing, it's not worth discussing. But if they asked for it? Amelie told them everything about her life alone with her mother in a tiny apartment, about the constant feeling of guilt for the illness of the dearest person, about the fear for the life and health of her mother, which she had experienced since a very young age. The girl mentioned Auberine as well, saying that it was to meet his parents that she rode that day on the trolleybus. Details of the behavior of the mother and father of the beloved did not report, limited only to the phrase that they made it clear that she was not a match for their son, and said that after that she broke up with her fiancé. This story did not have much to do with the case, but Amelie did not hold back. The parting with Auberine still tormented her, The girl did not tell anyone about her feelings and worries, and now suddenly they were attentive listeners. She shared with them what was still weighing on her soul, her disappointment in her beloved man. Rotten people. The old woman made a verdict. Not a good thing. Nothing good in their lives. They will not choose a wife for their grown-up son on a suitable lady. There will be no agreement between them. We've been there, we know. There are many such examples before our eyes. Life will not once again punish in your willful Oberon and his parents. Andrew said nothing. He looked at Emily with such sympathy, with such participation that words were not needed. The girl felt the man's support and approval. It was a pleasant feeling. Then it was the turn of the story about her mother again. Amélie told about the reception at the famous professor and his verdict. And now her mother needed an expensive operation, and it was urgent. I tried to find the money, Amélie continued. I did everything I could. I even went to a colleague, but he thought I was a fraud. That's why I cried at the bus stop after talking to him. What a fool, exclaimed the old woman in heart. He doesn't understand people at all. I see you for the second time in my life and I realize that you are a very honest and modest girl. Amélie continued. And he's been seeing me for so long, and he hasn't realized anything. Oberon, whom this old woman didn't even know about, annoyed her a lot. It seemed funny if it weren't for the tragic nature of the situation. Well, I can't get any money, Amélie summarized. Without an operation. Mom. The girl still could not pronounce the terrible word, but the listeners already understood everything. The old woman put her arm around Amélie's shoulders and stroked her head. Amélie cried again. But I can't help these silly tears, she continued. I can't help it. It's the first time I've been listened to. It's the first time I've been sympathized with. That's worth a lot, but the trouble hasn't gone away. And the problems haven't just evaporated. Money didn't materialize out of thin air. The old woman soothed Amélie, whispering some comforting words that really did make her feel better. Andrew silently looked at this picture and clearly thought something. How much money are we talking about? Finally asked the man. Amélie said the figures that made her panic. Andrew raised his eyebrows in surprise. What did you think, grandson? Sighed the old woman. These are the prices we have now. An ordinary person cannot get sick. And what, free of charge, this operation cannot be done? Asked Andrew. You can, replied Amélie, which has already managed to cope with emotions not without the participation of a kind old lady. For free you can wait in line for almost a year. Mom does not have that much time. Well, I am ready to give such an amount for treatment, said Andrew. Grandma looked at her grandson with pride and approval. Ellen gawked her eyes in surprise. Andrew can give her such a sum. But he doesn't look like such a rich man at all. Dressed well, but not flashy. His car is nice, but not high-end like Oberon's. And anyway, how can you accept such a gift from a complete stranger? Amélie's mind was buzzing. Well, how can she think about such details when her mom is slowly fading away without surgery? And lo and behold, still worried, anxious. Here is my edited version of the text. Amélie said cautiously. I'm afraid I can't accept such a sum. It doesn't seem right. Everything is right and fair, assured the old lady. You helped me in a difficult situation, and now Andrew is helping you. Boomerang, you've heard of it? The amounts are quite different. Amélie did not give up. So? The old lady didn't give up. Who has what opportunities? Do not worry. Andrew smiled and covered Amélie's hand with his warm palm. A friendly, soothing gesture that made the girl feel lighter in her soul. I do have such an opportunity. What's more, I spend a certain amount every year on charity. It's an ironclad rule. Amélie did not understand anything at all. If this Andrew is so rich, then why his grandmother did not have money for travel? Andrew, I have a good boy. He is a successful businessman, proudly declared the old lady. I raised him from a diaper. When his parents died, he was just a baby. I am not his own grandmother, even just a lonely neighbor. I couldn't bear the fact that my nice neighbor's child would end up in an orphanage. So I took him in, raised him like her own grandchild. And he was smart from a small age, serious beyond his years. I knew right away that the boy would go far. And he did. "Grandma does not miss a moment to brag about me," smiled Andrew. "But she's right. I really managed to build a business that brings a stable income. We make furniture to order. We already have many branches, and not only in our city. There's even a branch in Miami." "In Los Angeles," corrected the old lady, looking adoringly at her grandson. "Every year I spend a certain amount of money for charity. This year it should be your mom's. All the more, it seems that fate itself had arranged this meeting. What were the odds of bumping into you at the exact moment when you were sobbing with despair and helplessness at the bus stop? There's no such thing as coincidence. So, can you really give us that kind of money?" Ellen still couldn't believe his happiness. "But I can't just take it," said Amelie. "Let it be a receipt. I'll pay it back slowly. I'll pay it all back." "Oh, you're so stubborn." The old woman threw up her hands. "I understand that you are embarrassed," shook his head Andrew, looking carefully at Amelie. "I know people." "He does," the grandmother confirmed her grandson's words. "In business, otherwise it is impossible. Let's do it this way. I have long wanted to invest in some new enterprise. We'll register an LLC for you, an atelier that makes custom-made clothes. From what I understand from your story, you're a talented dressmaker. The amount for your mom's treatment will be part of the investment in the company. And then, when this enterprise will begin to bring income, and it will definitely happen, I'm the one who knows about such things. You will gradually and give me this money as part of the profit due to the investor. I hope I've made myself clear?" Amelie nodded. What was happening was more and more like a fairy tale. The investment, the firm, the new interesting job, and most importantly, the money for her mom's surgery. Was this really happening in reality? Amelie was suddenly afraid that now she would wake up and it would turn out that she just saw a wonderful dream. But no, everything turned out to be true. Andrew and Amelie exchanged phone numbers. And his grandmother took Amelie's number too. "Call me when you're feeling down," the old lady said. "Don't disappear. You're a very nice person. It's interesting to talk to you." And somehow it all spun up quickly. Amelie's life was changing from day to day. These changes even made her a little dizzy. First, Amelie's mom was sent to Chicago for surgery. Andrew not only paid for the necessary medical procedures, but also organized everything down to the last detail. He bought the tickets, arranged for rent for Amelie in Chicago, arranged a comfortable room for her mother, found all the rare drugs on the list. Amelie couldn't have done it on her own, especially not so fast. Andrew solved all problems as if at the snap of his fingers. He was an amazing man, Andrew. He didn't talk a lot, only business. Unlike his grandmother, he turned out to be a rather silent man. Often Andrew and Amelie would drive together on business, and both would be silent. Just silence. It wasn't oppressive, it wasn't uncomfortable. The girl felt waves of warmth and acceptance coming from Andrew. She was perfectly aware that she was falling in love with him. Of course she was, he was the perfect man. Except that the girl, every time she had such thoughts, restrained herself. Andrew. He probably has a soulmate. The man is not married. There is no wedding ring on his finger, but of course he is not free. Of course his chosen one is also ideal, some beauty of model appearance, with a pure soul and impeccable manners. Where can Amelie get to such a one? She thought. So Amelie only had to dream from time to time that one day Andrew will pay attention to her as a girl. Only these dreams seemed to be unfulfilled. For 2 weeks, while her mother was recovering in the hospital after a serious operation, Amelie spent in Chicago. Every day she visited her parents, brought her treats, cheered up her mom. The doctor said the surgery was a success, and added that the patient had managed to jump on the last carriage of the departing train. Just a little bit more, and, in short, Andrew and his grandmother met just in time. Andrew's grandmother was always in touch. She asked Amelie about her mother's health, rejoiced together with the girl obvious improvements. She also told her what places to visit in her free time in Chicago, wherever Amelie had been during that time. She had seen everything. It was very exciting, as the girl had never been in Chicago before. Andrew also often called, But the nature of conversations with him was rather businesslike. The man was engaged in registration of a new LLC of the firm, the director and chief master of which was to become Amelie. This slightly worried the girl. Will she be able to cope? She was perfectly capable of inventing new models and sewing. This is her real vocation. It was great that she would finally have the opportunity to earn money doing something she really liked, something that inspired her. The girl had long felt that she was burying her talent in the ground, working in an attire as a simple dressmaker. Fitting things to the figure is quite different from sewing outfits to order. That's where the imagination runs wild. But now you have to get into the paperwork. Amelie will be the director and co-owner of the firm. She'll be fine. The main thing is that Mom was saved. Now Amelie will do everything to make the firm flourish, and Andrew did not regret his decision. She will give him the entire amount, even more. As time passed, Mom got stronger and was discharged. Mother and daughter returned home, full of plans and hopes for a new life. Mom went back to work. Now she didn't need to take sick day after sick day. She looked like a young, healthy, energetic woman again. Amelie, on the other hand, had plunged headlong into her new firm. The work was addictive, inspiring, and joyful. The girl could not be happy with what she was doing now. Andrew helped her with documents and legal issues. He did not even need to ask. He was like some kind of inner instinct, felt when and where there are problems, and solved them easily and playfully, as he always did. Amelie struggled with herself, trying not to betray her feelings for Andrew. He saved her in a difficult and seemingly hopeless situation. Of course, the role of savior and caused in Amelie romantic feelings. But did Andrew need it? Hardly. He is just a good man who could not pass by the offended Amelie, giving money at the bus stop, thought the girl, especially since he had the means to help her. And he's also a businessman who decided to try a new project in a tire where they sew custom-made clothes. This is a potential source of good profit. That's why the man got involved, that's all. Andrew was serious, silent, even a little sullen. Looking at him, it was hard to imagine how kind and sensitive he was. With his subordinates, he spoke sometimes harshly and aloofly, especially not getting close to anyone. One day he told Amelie about his life. It happened one evening, when they sat up late for a report. Andrew had lost his parents at an early age in a fire in the wooden house where they all lived together. The fire had started. A vigilant neighbor, the same old lady from the bus, called the fire department in time. They arrived quickly, but the wooden building burst into flames like a matchbox. By the time they arrived, it had burned to the ground. Andrew was lucky, then his mother put him to sleep in a stroller in the yard in the fresh air. Meanwhile, she herself was doing things in the kitchen, which was immediately cut off from the exit by fire. Father was repairing the attic and didn't get out either. The house was old. The wiring should have been replaced a long time ago, and the windows had bars left by the previous owners. Andrew's parents were trapped, but he himself was unharmed. The boy was taken in by the very neighbor who raised the alarm. She loved Andrew's parents. More than once she told the boy that they were very good and hard-working guys. Both from orphanages, both smart and focused on success. They would have achieved a lot in life, if not for the damn fire, complained sometimes guardian Andrew. You have to live for 3 and realize all the plans and hopes of your parents. And Andrew tried very hard to be the kind of man that his mother and father would be proud of. He always studied well. Study was given to him easily. There was time for walks and for extra classes. The boy early demonstrated that his hands grow from where they should. Even in childhood, Andrew himself learned to make simple furniture. And when he was only 11 years old, he and a couple of friends went to the bypass road to sell what he had made himself. The chairs and tables quickly sold out. People bought simple furniture for the garden, for the cottage. Andrew then even received the first orders. Slowly, little by little, established his business. Andrew opened his own production. By the end of school, he already had his own company with hired workers, regular suppliers, and buyers. Everything as it should be, but unofficially, because Andrew remained a minor. But the money he got quite real. Then the guy easily entered the local economic university. He specifically chose such a direction to know how to properly and officially conduct their business. Well, at one point I decided to legalize my mini firm, smiled Andrew, remembering those times. It worked. Furthermore, we grew, developed, opened branches, and now I own my own mini empire. After this story, Amelie had even more respect for Andrew. What a man. He himself rose from the bottom, went all the way from homemade furniture to a network of furniture production. That's great. Amelie's feelings for Andrew did not fade. On the contrary, they flared up day by day. Outwardly calm and even stern Andrew. No one knew how kind and considerate he really is. Lucky his girlfriend, Amelie thought. I wonder what she is like. And how does she feel about the fact that her beloved literally disappears 24 hours a day at work? That his furniture mini empire is engaged in his new project Atelier. Amelie gradually became a keen businesswoman. Now she understood a lot of things, and almost all issues were solved by herself without the help of Andrew. The girl even realized her long-standing dream of driving. She passed the license and bought a new car in the salon. Not expensive foreign car, but quite a good and reliable car. Amelie was a very careful driver, but unfortunately not everything depends on a single road user. Racers and daredevils are not cancelled. There are plenty of them everywhere. One day Amelie was caught up with such a rule breaker. It happened right at an intersection. The airbag didn't deploy for some reason. Amelie hit her head on the steering wheel, no harm done, but she cut her forehead. An ambulance arrived at the scene and took her to the city hospital. She needed a few stitches. Amelie sat in the treatment room while the doctor worked on her forehead. The girl did not feel any pain. All she could think about was how badly her favorite car had been damaged. When the wrecker was taking the car away, Amelie didn't have time to see the damage, but it was obviously more serious than her own small injury. After the doctor finished his work, the girl was lifted into the room. Can I go now? I just have a lot to do at work today. I feel fine, she turned to the doctor. No, the doctor shook his head. You'll have to spend 24 hours in the hospital. We have to rule out a concussion. Amelie was frankly bored in her single room. She didn't intend to go to the hospital, so she hadn't even brought a book. At least she could read now. And so there was only the phone. The girl told her mom that she was spending the night at a friend's house. She didn't tell her about the accident. Amelie was used to protect her mother from stress, although her mother's health now did not cause any concern. Amelie lay on the bed, leafing through the news feed, when the door of the room rattled open. Standing on the threshold was Andrew, his hair disheveled, anxiety in his eyes. Seeing Amelie staring at him in surprise from the bed, he jumped up to her and hugged her tightly. I was so afraid of losing you. Warmth went through the girl's body from these sincere words of Andrew. He cared about her. Wow. Amelie pressed herself against him with pleasure. She had been dreaming about this for so long. I was afraid that there was something serious with you. Andrew pulled back a little and looked into the girl's eyes. Video in the local Publix, your mangled car. Got the license plate. It says the driver was taken to the hospital in serious condition. I don't think I could not without you. I'm fine, Amelie smiled. It was exaggerated on purpose to make it more interesting for people to read. It's just a scratch on my forehead. The doctor put in a couple of stitches. That's nothing. Andrew smiled back. Well, now it seems there's no point in hiding it, he said. I didn't tell you anything, because you were, well, kind of dependent on me. I didn't want to embarrass you, Andrew admitted. I myself do not know at what point I have feelings for you. Maybe when you told us about your trouble at the pizzeria? Or maybe when we organized your mother's treatment together with Auburn. I don't know, but I've never met anyone so sincere, honest and beautiful. Today, when I heard about the accident, I was so afraid I'd lost you forever. It's such a fear. I've never experienced that before. Amelie smiled. She will find the words to tell Andrew how she feels, but a little later. Surely he himself can see everything in her eyes. Andrew is smart, and he has a keen sense of people. Well, now you are in the same situation as your grandmother once, Amelie smiled. Remember, she said at the bus stop that someday you would understand her, that you would realize how scared you were for your loved ones. And that's what happened. And it's true, and Andrew's eyes lit up a cheerful light. The situation is very similar. Grandma, as always, was right, and so in everything. A teacher rescued an orphan boy, and a short time later found herself on the street. Pete leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He stayed late at the office, reviewing reports on the financial status of his restaurants. He had a whole chain of them now. The numbers were encouraging. Business was booming, not without problems, of course. Often there were various incidents that had to be regulated and cleaned up. That's business, but in general the restaurants flourished, which of course could not help but encourage. Who'd have thought it? Years ago, Pete was starving, dreaming of a portion of fries and a patty, a piece of chocolate cake, a glass of milkshake with foam. And now he's feeding half the town on his own. Yeah, life's a director. Pete's really rich now, big business, bank accounts. He can afford to travel anywhere in the world, expensive cars, clothes from famous designers. True, here are the trappings of a luxurious life. All this tinsel is not for him. Most importantly, the man now does not need help, he helps himself. It is so nice to be able to make someone a little happier. Pete regularly transfers money to foundations that raise money for the treatment of people, and of course sponsors several orphanages. Most of these institutions are located in New York, where Pete has been living for more than 20 years. The man does not ignore the orphanage in Sandersville. Sandersville is a small provincial town. Dusty streets with broken sidewalks, weedy squares overgrown with weeds. It's a place of desolation and tranquility. It's where Pete spent his childhood. The man often reminisces about his early years, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not. Pictures from the past sometimes rise up before his eyes by themselves. Pete doesn't chase these memories away. On the contrary, he likes to think about the fact that he was able to get out of the pit, to stand, to survive, to become strong. In addition, his own story does not let him forget that there are many boys and girls in the world who need support and attention. His children's son and daughter are already old enough to talk to them about serious things. Andrew is in the 8th grade. Jessica is a year younger. Pete has long since told them about his life. At their age, he had a hard time. Children need to know that the world is not equally fair and kind to everyone. Both Andrew and Jessica are lucky. Everything comes easy to them, so to speak, by birthright. But that doesn't mean that others are doing the same. Son and daughter are well aware of how many disadvantaged children in the world and empathize with these people. That especially pleases their father. Andrew sometimes travels to orphanages together with Pete. They see everything, know everything, and even created their own group and social networks to help orphaned children. They collect clothes, toys. Good guys. Pete was afraid that he would spoil his heirs too much, and he didn't want his son and daughter to turn into soulless snobs. Such a fate often awaited the children of wealthy parents. Pete had seen enough of such offspring. Permissiveness, indifference to other people's misfortune, confidence that the world revolves only around them. It's a sight to behold. Pete did his best to make Andrew and Jessica grow up sensitive, empathetic, attentive, and he was succeeding. They were doing it. His wife, Esmeralda, supported him in everything he did. They've known each other for years, almost a lifetime. Esmeralda also grew up in an orphanage. The girl was abandoned in the maternity hospital after she was born. Quiet, shy, unrequited, just like Pete. She'd long been the butt of local leaders' jokes, a punching bag. A person to assert herself, take out her frustrations on. Pete was the same way. He tried not to run into the guys, lived in constant fear, flinched at every rustle or loud sound. He had become strong for her sake, for Esmeralda's sake. He could not stand up for himself, but it was also unbearable to see this girl, who was quiet in her big eyes, being insulted. They became friends with Esmeralda. At first they played together, discussed some problems and worries. Both of them had no one to share their joys and sorrows with, but in each other they saw attentive interlocutors, support, and acceptance. Later, somehow imperceptibly, all this grew into romantic feelings. And then Pete's life changed abruptly. From the miserable orphanage with its gray, shabby walls, stinking mattresses and scanty porridge in the morning, he suddenly found himself in a completely different world. No, Pete wasn't adopted. He was a teenager at the time. Who wants one of those? People prefer to adopt cute little babies. That's not what happened. Pete lived with a family until he was 9, and it was a wonderful family. The man's heart still ached when he thought of his parents. It's a shame they can't see what their son has accomplished. Too bad Pete couldn't do something nice for them. He had a lot of money now, and fulfilling his mother and father's dreams wasn't a problem for him. Dad kept talking about a new car because the old six was always breaking down. Mom wanted to go to the sea. She had been to the resort only once and now dreamed of repeating this trip. Except that they'd been gone for over 30 years. Pete and his family didn't live poorly, but they were never poor. They had a clean, cozy one-bedroom apartment in which the young heir was allocated a whole room. There was an old car. On it my father took the whole family to the river, then in the woods. These were wonderful trips, even if not to the sea. Pete never went hungry. Yes, sometimes there was not enough money for candy or ice cream, but there was always a pot of borscht or goulash in the refrigerator. Mom worked as a painter. Dad worked at the factory and the shop. There was enough money to live on. We didn't live poorly, but we weren't poor. Pete didn't think about such things at all then. He enjoyed life, a quiet, sunny childhood, socializing with his parents and friends. His mother and father never quarreled. At least Pete didn't remember that. They never raised their voices at their son either, even if he did something wrong. His parents always talked to Pete like an adult, always explained the consequences of his behavior, told him what excessive carelessness could lead to. Pete, in turn, tried not to upset them. He studied well and did not bully. Attitude is more important than anything else in this world, his father had said many times. We have no one else, only us. And that's why it's important for us to protect each other. Pete liked those conversations. He saw their family as a close-knit team. Mom, Dad, Pete, they were each other's rock. It was wonderful to have that kind of support behind him. Pete learned that both his parents had grown up in an orphanage. Sometimes one of them would tell stories about those years. Pete listened to these stories with his mouth open. Mom and Dad's childhood was very different from his own. Different teachers, angry children, a life of starvation. And no one, absolutely no one, cared about these boys and girls. Pete was glad that he lived with loving and understanding parents. Then the boy could not imagine that one day he himself would end up in an orphanage. He could not have dreamed of such a thing. He has a mom and dad, they love him very much. And for complete happiness he lacked grandparents. Many friends had them, and it's great to drink tea with grandmother's cakes, to go fishing with his grandfather. But what can you do? That's life. But his parents are the best. Pete remembered that warm summer day forever. He still sometimes dreamed of flying on his scooter into his hometown yard through the archway. The cool gloom was replaced by bright sunlight and heat. The smell of heated grass hits his nose. Next to me is Lexi, a loyal friend and comrade. They've been sitting at the same desk since first grade. Lexi laughs, talking about something. And Pete. He immediately notices the crowd of neighbors outside his driveway, and his tiny heart clenches with misgivings. Pete still could not understand how he, 9 years old, at first sight then guessed that his parents are in trouble. The boy suddenly wanted to see his mom or dad. Right now, as it usually happens, they would dispel his fears. But his parents had gone to the village in the morning to buy meat. They often visited the local collective farm. The products there were fresh, real, useful. That's what Mom said. Pete often went with them, and he loved these mini vacations. Sitting in the back seat, looking at the road, and there were all fields and hills. It's picturesque. Mother and father are quietly talking about something, making plans. It's nice, peaceful. There's a lot of interesting things in the village itself. Even the smell is different there. Mom always wrinkles her nose, says, "It smells like manure, but Pete likes it for some reason." There are a lot of animals in the village, horses, cows, and goats. It's a common thing for the local kids. And Pete always looked at these animals, opening his eyes in amazement. But that day, the boy stayed home. Lexi suggested scooters at the new park. There are special paths and a fountain recently opened. How could he resist? The parents didn't mind. They always took their son's opinion into account, even when he was a baby. "All right, stay home, if you want," Mom said with a smile and brushed Pete's hair back. "We'll bring you something good to eat," Dad promised, sitting down in the driver's seat. Pete nodded happily. He and Lexi saw their parents off together, standing in the driveway, and of course at the time he couldn't even think about seeing them for the last time. The boy waved goodbye to them, and then headed off with his friend to adventure. It was a wonderful day. Pete and Lexi had a lot of fun riding on the new paths, getting to know the local kids, splashing in the fountain. Their friends had time to climb trees, play with a stray dog, and chase pigeons. It was fun. Summer vacation is the best time. So it was until the moment that divided the boy's life into before and after. The change began at the moment when Pete noticed the neighbors in his driveway. These people, familiar from his earliest childhood, looked anxious, worried, confused. They were discussing something. Lexi hadn't noticed them yet. She kept telling Pete a joke, but he wasn't listening. The boy's attention was on the neighbors. He desperately wanted to see his mom or dad among them. They should have been back by now. But his parents weren't there, which was scary for some reason. It was really scary. Even his palms were sweating, and goosebumps ran down his back. Finally, one of the neighbors noticed Pete and Lexi. He said something to the others, and now there were about a dozen pairs of eyes staring at the friends. Immediately, the boy felt a large shiver begin to hit him. The first to hug Pete was Aunt Stacy, his mom's friend. She often came to their house for tea, and always brought something tasty for the master's son. "Trouble," she said, looking into the boy's eyes. "There is trouble, terrible trouble. You must be strong." Neighbors told Pete that his father had lost control of the car, and the car at high speed went into the ditch. There was a pothole in the road. It hadn't been there before, but it was hard to see it right away. The fault of the road service. Now the dangerous area has been fenced off, no one else will get hurt. But Pete's parents died in that terrible accident. Both of them. That was a hard thing to realize. It's even harder to accept. How could it be? Mother and father were something fundamental, something unshakable. Pete even lost consciousness for a while. He woke up at Aunt Stacy's. She was home in time to call an ambulance. The doctors came and gave the boy some kind of injection. Everyone looked at Pete with sympathy, stroked his head, hugged him. That made it even scarier. The boy did not think about his future. He was in a very strange state. Everything around him suddenly faded, somehow slowed down. Pete saw the world as if from the outside, as if he was just an observer, not a participant in this life. The neighbors took care of the funeral. Pete was staying with Aunt Stacy. He didn't want to go home. It was scary to walk into an empty apartment with no mom and dad. Aunt Stacy had sent the kids to her mother-in-law's for a while. And she must have taken time off work, because Aunt Stacy was always with Pete, never leaving him for a minute. Aunt Stacy often cried when she thought the boy couldn't see or hear her. Next to Pete, she tried to speak in a cheerful voice, even sort of smiling. It looked unnatural. The boy didn't make it to his parents' funeral. They saw them off on their last journey, only friends and neighbors. Pete had a hysteria the night before. He screamed, sobbed, convulsed, which incredibly frightened not only Aunt Stacy, but also himself. The boy would have liked to calm down, but he just couldn't. They took him to the hospital, gave him some pills, gave him some shots, and everything around him became unimportant. Pete lay on the bed and stared up at the white hospital ceiling. Not a very exciting thing for a boy to do. But it didn't seem that way to Pete at the time. A few days passed, the boy seemed to come to his senses. Neighbors were allowed to visit him. In the hospital courtyard, the boy sat on a bench between Aunt Stacy and Aunt Esmeralda. Both had their arms around his shoulders. Across from him stood more people from their home. They were all sad, even gloomy. "You'll have to stay at the orphanage for a while," Aunt Stacy said at last, her voice trembling. "We'll visit you," Aunt Esmeralda added. Pete shuddered. Until now, he hadn't thought about where and with whom he would live. There was too much on his mind at once. And now, hearing the phrase orphanage, the boy was alarmed, frightened. How could it be? His mom and dad had grown up in an orphanage. They had said many times that their son was very lucky to be born in a family. And now he would have to go to an institution like this. Tears came to the boy's eyes. He tried to force them inside, but nothing worked. Neighbors calmed him down, promised to visit him and even take him to their homes for the weekend, if the management of the orphanage allowed it. But Pete realized then, at the age of 9, sitting on a bench in the hospital courtyard, he realized that now he was alone, all alone, no more of their wonderful team. From now on, he would have to make his own way. Something told the boy that it would be difficult. He had to pull himself together, prepare for a long struggle, but at the time he had no idea what he'd be up against. Looking ahead, it should be said that the neighbors did visit the boy. At first, Aunt Stacy came most often, always dressed up, always with goodies, hugging Pete, asking him about his life. But then these visits became more and more infrequent and finally came to nothing. The boy was not offended. He understood everything perfectly. After all, he had to grow up sharply. People have their own affairs, their own worries. Not to the neighbor's boy their own problems to deal with. Pete was taken from the hospital by two women, one in a police uniform, the other in ordinary clothes. They did not talk to the boy, did not explain anything to him, only gave him dry orders: get in the car, get out. The orphanage at first glance resembled an ordinary kindergarten, which Pitya had visited not so long ago. The same long 3-story building, the same green yard with playgrounds. The policewoman, having signed some papers, left. But the second escort took Pete inside. The boy was shown how everything was organized in the orphanage: several bedrooms with modest beds, a dining room, a playroom, and classrooms. The orphanage was outside the city, so the children did not go to a regular school. Teachers came to visit them themselves. On the first day, Pete was beaten up by local boys just to show who was in charge and stronger. The girls saw this and giggled gloatingly. Then, when the teacher came to the noise, looking her in the eyes, these girls said that the newcomer himself fell down the stairs, when Pete also received from the teacher for carelessness. "You're good, you didn't complain and fight." One of the attackers said afterwards, "I did the right thing. We would have beaten you up even more for that." Pete didn't say anything. He didn't say anything to the teacher out of fear of incurring more anger. Certainly not out of a desire to keep his tormentors out of trouble. The woman just didn't care. She wouldn't help Pete in any way. There was no help to be had here at all. A hostile and evil world. The gray orphan days dragged on. It was hard to get used to it all. Instead of a small but own room, a bedroom for 20 bunks. Instead of mom's delicious homemade food and incomprehensible brew. Instead of acceptance and soulful conversations, complete indifference. At best indifference, or even anger and aggression. There were no friends here, no attentive neighbors. Pete was immediately disliked. He'd been a homeschooled child for 9 years. He'd been loved, pampered, cared for. And these children, most of them, had never known the comfort of home and the love of family. They all had hard fates and believed that those more fortunate were now their eternal debtors. Pete couldn't stand up to this bitterness, not yet at that time. He was shocked by the behavior of his peers. The world was opening up from a completely different perspective. Everything was out of whack. He had to adapt. Pete was often beaten, and it was impossible to predict what would come next time. The boy tried to stay out of sight of his abusers. But how can you do that if you have to sleep in the same bedroom with them every night? Pete was doused with water, tripped over, called names, insulted, spit on, thrown things at, and had to endure it all. Pete tried to make friends with these kids. Not that he liked them, not at all. He just wanted to make his life a little more peaceful and pleasant. But it wasn't working. He and these guys, they were like different species. They had no common ground, no common themes. The boys from the orphanage were bitter and understood only the language of force. They were very different from Pete's friends, like Tom or Jake. Pete realized later that life had made them like that. As an adult, strong and wealthy, he began to help orphanages. If the underprivileged boys and girls realized that at least someone cared, if they saw help, kindness, sympathy, maybe some of them would think that the world is not only aggression and anger. Pete really wanted to hope so. The man was glad that since the time of his childhood, many things in orphanages had become different. And when the favorite happy child had to adapt to a new life in an accelerated mode, schooling had begun. With surprise and annoyance, Pete realized that the lessons here are purely formal. The level of preparation of his classmates was incredibly low. Of course, Pete, who had always studied well, showed his abilities on the first day of school. It didn't happen on purpose. His classmates could not cope with the simplest tasks. They could barely read. Pete was very praised by the teacher. Finally, a smart student, it's a pleasure to work with him, rejoiced Annie Smith. Pete smiled. He liked that he was finally noticed, that they were saying good things about him. But that very evening he was noticed by a crowd of boys in the backyard. The girls, as always, watched from a distant distance and silently approved. "Here's to you, upstart," said the boys. "You think you're the smartest? Don't show off." Pete was hurt, offended, scared. But he learned his lesson well. He didn't shine his knowledge in class anymore. He kept quiet. He made mistakes on his tests on purpose, just so he wouldn't be praised anymore, just so he wouldn't stand out, just so he wouldn't stand out. Esmeralda was Pete's classmate. She didn't belong to any group of girls, and was friends only with the same quiet girls she was. These girls were often the objects of cruel jokes from their peers. The boys didn't touch them, usually preferring to deal with their own. But Pete quickly realized that girls could sometimes be even more cruel than boys. They made up insults for Esmeralda and her friends that would make people's ears perk up. They also spoiled their belongings, made them take their place on duty, and took away the treats the children were occasionally given in the dining hall. Sometimes there were scuffles with girls in the yard with bites, torn hair, and broken noses. The educators looked the other way. They preferred not to delve into children's conflicts, separated and punished everyone. But some teenagers were simply feared by adults, knew about these children's past and guessed what they were capable of. It was easier for them to lock quiet Esmeralda in a closet for 24 hours than to deal with those who bullied. Pete had been locked up in that closet more than once for nothing, if that's what it took. But he even liked it there, quiet, dark, calm, no one yanking him around, calling him to get out, calling him names. Just sit there and think. One bad thing, hunger quickly began to pester the growing body. Life in the orphanage was half-starved as it was, and then there was punishment. But Pete eventually got used to it. As the years passed, Pete and Esmeralda had already become firm friends, already even began to show between them romantic feelings. The homeboy had changed. He became stronger, more resilient, learned to fight back. And it was all thanks to Esmeralda. It was unbearable to watch a crowd of girls bullying her. Then in the corner she is squeezed and start pinching. Then forced to duty in the kitchen every day. Then she has to wash their socks in the bathroom, a whole mountain of socks. But he couldn't take it. Pete saw the girls kicking the unrequited Esmeralda again one day, and he stood up for her. He knew exactly what he was doing. The girls were taken aback at first, and then they started laughing. Not laughing. One of them, the strongest and toughest, pushed Pete against the wall. The blow was hard enough, but the boy stood his ground and pushed her back. Actually, of course, you can't hit girls. Pete had learned that in his past life when he was in kindergarten. But in front of him now was not a girl, but a monster, unpleasant, angry and ruthless. The girls, accustomed to resolving conflicts by swearing and fighting, pounced on Pete. But even though he was a puny boy, still a boy, he fought back quite well, and at the same time he understood perfectly well that the girls would call for help from the boys. It would be more difficult with them. Pete had been practicing hammering his fists with a flour sack in the closet for a long time, secretly from everyone. This bag replaced his punching bag. He did push-ups, pull-ups. He had to accept the rules of the game. If in this world the strongest survives, what does it mean to become the strongest? "Fool, you'll be in trouble now," warned one of the girls, the recognized leader of the company. The ladies realized that they could not overpower the boy and proudly withdrew. Pete knew exactly what their threats meant. They would tell their buddies. They would take revenge on Pete for his courage. Trouble did loom ahead. But Esmeralda looked at him as a savior, as a hero, and all distant problems under that gaze somehow faded, lost importance. "Thank you," she whispered quietly. "But what about you now? They'll get you, won't they?" "Nothing." Pete waved his hand. "I'm not afraid of them." And at that moment he really wasn't afraid of reprisals. He didn't care. What mattered was that Esmeralda was looking at him in a special way and smiling. They sat together on the bench for a long time afterward and chatted about this and that, learning new things about each other. It turned out that Esmeralda's mother had died in the maternity hospital. She seemed to be a very young girl. The relatives didn't want to take the baby. It was an embarrassment to them. So Esmeralda lived from infancy in children's institutions. Apparently, such a fate of a granddaughter, in the opinion of relatives, was not a disgrace. That was her story. Of course, payback caught up with Pete very soon. "Are you the coolest guy in the world now?" was the question one of his attackers asked him. The question was, of course, purely rhetorical. Of course, Pete was beaten, and badly. The girls were nearby. They suggested to their defenders ways to humiliate the victim, one more sophisticated than the other. But that time Pete still fought back. He managed to break a couple of noses, kick someone in the stomach, and then found himself in the dust on the ground. And he was the only one who got hit. But still the boys were surprised. Before, the victim was wordless and toothless, and then suddenly it was like this. He was less likely to be touched. No one wanted to get punched in the teeth or nose by a mob. And there was the occasional one-on-one attack. No, not anymore. Pete sighed, stretched, turned off the computer. Time to go home. Tomorrow he could sleep in a little longer, spend time with his family. The man threw on his coat, walked out of the office. His car was parked in the back of the restaurant. Where the garbage cans stood, food that customers got fed up with was thrown into them. So homeless people who wanted to satisfy their hunger often hung around here. Pete wasn't surprised to see an elderly woman in tattered clothes and shot sneakers, clearly off someone else's foot, standing next to the bins. Pete didn't chase the homeless away from the bins. On the contrary, he asked the staff to leave the food in the containers on the site, not to throw it all in the bucket. He felt sorry for these destitute people. Poor thing, he thought. But the woman, smelling the presence of a man, was frightened, shuddered, turned around. She looked anxiously at him. Pete was dumbfounded. This old woman? No, such a thing is simply impossible. She was very much like the man who had once played a pivotal role in his life. The man gazed intently into the poor woman's face. The woman also looked at him studyingly. After a few years of surviving in the orphanage, an amazing thing happened in Pete's life. A new English teacher, Laurel Swan, came to visit. The class, as always, began to test her on the first day. Mean jokes, attempts to disrupt the lesson, even direct insults. Usually the teachers either lost it or lost their temper. But Laurel Swan looked at the troublemakers with sadness and even pity. It was amazing. Pete, who, as always, was ashamed of his classmates, watched Laurel Swan with interest. This was an unusual person, it was immediately felt. The new teacher had an interesting lesson. She didn't torture the class with the necessary rules, but turned on cartoons in English. The pupils at first, out of habit, only tried to make jokes, but somehow they got involved. Even the most disinterested in learning bullies. Then Laurel Swan began to ask questions. Pete, to his own surprise, knew all the answers. As he answered, the teacher shook her head approvingly and smiled. She seemed to be impressed by the able pupil. She hadn't expected to find such a one here. Pete was no longer afraid of being pushed and taunted by the local bullies, so he answered as he saw fit. "You're an amazingly talented boy," she praised Pete when the others had left. And he realized that the teacher purposely did not shower him with compliments in front of his classmates so as not to arouse their envy. What an intelligent and sensitive person, Pete thought. "Thank you," said the embarrassed and delighted Pete. It had been a long time since anyone had been so attentive to him. "Tomorrow I'll bring you some textbooks to study with the kids. What about you? You should be interested in something else," Laurel said. And indeed, the next lesson she brought a bright, colorful textbook. There were many fascinating stories in the form of comics. "We will repeat the material with the students for now," said the teacher. "You don't need it. Read it and tell me if you understand it," Laurel Swan said to Pete. Pete delved into the reading. The bright pictures were pleasing to the eye. The boy was engrossed in the story, and he didn't notice how the lesson flew by. "Did you understand anything?" Laurel Swan leaned over the desk with a smile. "I understood everything, but I didn't have time to finish it. Too bad." "Interesting," Pete said. "Take the book with you. You'll have time to read it." "Yeah, you do? I bought it for my daughter, but she didn't seem interested." "Let it serve someone," the teacher added. Laurel Swan made Pete's life happier and more pleasant, gave it a special meaning. And the other children liked her a lot too. It was a rare teacher who interacted with the class not through humiliation and insults, but through explanations, frank conversations on the heart. Both girls and boys were drawn to her. But it was obvious to everyone that Laurel Swan was Pete's favorite. But there were no objections. The classmates saw that Pete was making great progress in English. He helped them too. He never said no to anyone, even the ones who had recently beaten him up in the backyard. Pete devoured one after another of the interesting English books Laurel Swan brought him. Then the teacher handed the boy a player with several CDs. "Reading is one thing," she said. "You could use some listening too. English is a little hard to listen to, but you'll do fine. I know." "Thank you," Pete said, but he looked at the player with doubt. "It's expensive. There's no guarantee that the boys won't take it away from me. I'm afraid I can't take it." Laurel Swan seemed to understand. "I'll make a deal with the principal," she said. "He'll let you into the classrooms after school at certain hours when no one is here. That's where you'll study. Is that all right with you?" "Of course it is," Pete exclaimed. It was so nice to do something he loved and enjoyed in the silence of an empty classroom. It was not only learning English, but also a great opportunity to be alone with himself. This privacy Pete really lacked in the orphanage. And this is beautiful. Pete often talked to Laurel Swan about more than just English. They had become almost real friends. Pete told his teacher about his tragedy. It was so nice to share moments from the past with someone. The woman shook her head, sighing from time to time. "Oh, you've had a hard time, Pete," she said. Not always the conversations between the teacher and the able pupil were so heavy and serious. Sometimes they laughed and joked, sometimes they discussed the news, sometimes they argued, and sometimes they were happy to find that they agreed. Esmeralda liked Laurel Swan too, but she was shy of the teacher. A girl of that age in general was afraid of everyone and everything. Pete saw that life in the orphanage had a negative effect on Esmeralda. Kind and sensitive by nature, she couldn't stand the pressure. At least now Esmeralda had him, Pete. He wouldn't let her get hurt. One day Laurel Swan suggested Pete enter a regional competition. He had to write an essay in English, decorate it with drawings, and send it to New York. "Why, you've got a great imagination and a high level of language skills. You'll do great," said the teacher. "Well, I don't know," Pete hesitated. "Who is he?" "A kid from the orphanage. The other kids are homeschooled, they go abroad and tutor. How can he compare to them?" "I know," said Laurel Swan confidently. "All you will succeed." "What's there to write about?" Pete asked. "The theme is summer vacation. Describe the perfect day of your happiest vacation. I think that would be good." Pete thought for a moment. He knew right away what kind of day he would write about. Mom and Dad were still with him then. They both had the day off. They got up early, got in the car, and drove into the woods to get mushrooms. That day they saw a deer up close. The deer jumped out onto the road, gave the men a worried look, even trembled. And then suddenly, as if it realized that these people were not dangerous. By some inner instinct the deer guessed, and just went about its business. It began to nibble the grass, letting them admire themselves. It was a real miracle. All three of them froze, watching the cute animal. Then there was a wonderful picnic in the woods. Mom made her signature pies with onions and eggs, which Pete loved so much. We picked a lot of mushrooms. In the evening, Dad fried potatoes with them. Adrian showed up at the smell. He lived one floor down, and he knew what was coming. "And here you are, you lazybones," he exclaimed. All three of them started talking about Adrian. "Will you take me next time?" the boy asked with hope in his eyes. "Of course we will," his father promised. "And that was today too. Should I take you with me?" Well, did not guess something. But the promised joint trip never happened. Instead, Pete ended up in an orphanage. I wonder how Lexi is doing now. All grown up, I guess. Does he still remember his childhood friend, Pete thought. At that moment, he didn't know and couldn't know that not only had Lexi not forgotten him, but he was trying to make his way back to him. But it was difficult. The orphanage and its grounds were behind a high, blank fence. In addition, the site itself was located far away from the city. Lexi was just a kid. Still, he had come to the gate several times and begged the guard to let him in, or at least to send word to his friend. The guard invariably turned the boy away. Of course, he never sent any message to Pete. Juvenile visits were not allowed. Lexi's parents were going through a divorce and couldn't handle their son's requests. He begged them to go to Pete's with him, but to no avail. "I don't have time," they said. And then, when the parents took pity on Lexi, well, how did they take pity? It was just a fight over who the son loved more. During this period, each parent tried to fulfill Lexi's every wish. Anyway, Lexi's dad called the orphanage to arrange a date. But Pete was no longer there. He was transferred to another place. And all thanks to Laurel Swan, her faith in a talented student. Pete learned all of this later, when Lexi found an old friend on social media. They met as if the years apart had never happened. Lexi is still Pete's best friend, reliable, loyal, always there for him. Laurel Swan insisted. Pete took the essay. It was a passion for the boy. It was so nice to remember that happy day. Esmeralda helped her friend and took care of the design. Pete was not much of a draftsman, but she was very good at it. Esmeralda drew a deer so cute, and most importantly, so remarkably similar to the deer Pete had once seen. "I've never been in the woods," she smiled sadly. "We'll go for a walk with you. When we grow up, will we get out of here? I wish we could. Maybe life will be better later." "It will be. I've lived there. It's really nice there," Pete said. He was still surprised that Esmeralda had spent her whole life in those walls and had no idea what most people were like. Well, she would have a pleasant surprise when she left the orphanage. The essay won the prize and went to the all-Russian stage of the contest. Only this stage was not absentee. It was required to come to New York in person. The format was as follows: each participant goes on stage and receives a task from the jury to compose a story on a certain topic. You have to orient yourself lightning fast, improvise, fantasize. "You can do it. You can definitely do it," Laurel Swan excitedly paced the class. "You can win. I know you can. And the prize is a ticket to the future. Free education in a boarding school for gifted children. It's a really worthwhile institution. If you get there, you're lucky, and that's it. You'll become a successful person. Graduates from there are supervised and guided. First, the most prestigious universities queue up, and then employers. You have every chance, every right to have that future." Pete, who of course was already thinking about the future, realized how important it was for him to participate in this competition. It made him anxious and excited. What if he couldn't handle it? "I will prepare you," Laurel Swan continued, as if she had heard the thoughts of her promising student. "You are more worthy of this place than anyone else. We'll study hard. You'll do well." And indeed, Laurel Swan began to study with Pete separately on an accelerated program. The principal was happy about that. If his pupil won a competition of this level, it was a big plus for their orphanage. He allowed Pete and Laurel Swan to take the class after school, and even provided them with everything they needed: a VCR, a laptop, a record player. "It's not enough," Laurel Swan worried. "We have to do it on the weekends too. I'll talk to the principal. Maybe he'll let you come to my house on weekends, because you have a great potential, but you don't have enough base. You have to work hard, and everything will work out." The director said it's okay. Moreover, he even allocated money from the budget of the orphanage for bus fare. Not a huge sum, but still, for the first time in many years, Pete was alone in the city. He waited for the right bus, got on the empty seat. It was so nice to ride through the city like that, looking out the window. Laurel Swan met him at the bus stop. It was a little unusual to see her outside the school office, but it was nice too. Their path wound through the park. They chatted, laughed, joked. Pete suddenly imagined that he was just an ordinary kid. He was no different from the boys around him, was he? And there he is, walking next to his aunt or even his mom. They're talking about something, smiling. It's a typical picture. The people around them don't realize that this is what happiness looks like. For them, it's all routine. It's amazing how complicated life is, Pete thought. "There's my house," Laurel Swan said. Pete looked around at the high-rise buildings. A standard dwelling in a typical yard. He'd lived in one like it with his parents, and he'd go back there to his own apartment. When he turned 18, Laurel Swan's apartment was exactly like his parents', which made it seem familiar. 2 rooms, a small but cozy kitchen. Pete looked around with interest. It was obvious that Laurel Swan was not a rich man. Simple furniture, inexpensive wallpaper. But there was a special atmosphere in these rooms, warm, soft, soothing. It must be nice to live here. Pete knew Laurel Swan had a daughter, Linda, about his age. I'd love to meet her. Laurel Swan must have raised an interesting person. The boy hoped it would be wonderful to be friends with the teacher's daughter if he could make another friend. There were so few of them in his life, after all. The teacher never talked much about her daughter. They discussed all sorts of things, but not Linda. That was even more interesting. The boy had no idea what she was like. But as soon as Linda entered the apartment, Pete realized that they were unlikely to become friends. Laurel Swan was at that moment explaining to a student at the kitchen table the rules of constructing complex English sentences. A kettle was boiling on the stove, and an apple pie was cooking in the oven. Pete was anticipating a pleasant tea party, and then the door rattled open, and a teenage girl appeared on the doorstep. A daring miniskirt, revealing long, skinny legs with sharp knees, a tight top, thick platform shoes. Her short hair was dyed a strange green color, her large eyes thickly lined with black. Her eyelashes were clumped together from a thick coat of mascara. Pete stared at the girl in surprise. He had imagined Linda quite differently, not a Turgenevian young lady, of course, but not like that either. This Linda reminded him subtly of the aggressive girls from the orphanage. And it wasn't about her appearance. Well, maybe the girl likes this image? She has the right to express herself. The essence was something else, a cold, prickly look, contemptuously compressed lips, deliberately swaggering manner of movement. "Linda, hello." Laurel Swan smiled at her daughter. "This is Pete. I told you about him, remember? He's getting ready for the pageant." Hi, the boy waved his hand. Linda gave the guest a haughty look and turned to her mother, ignoring the greeting. "Do you have anything to eat? I won't be long." Laurel Swan scurried to the refrigerator. "Yes, of course," she said. "I'll eat in my room," Linda said, and left. Pete was embarrassed by the scene. Linda appeared to be an insolent and boorish person. Laurel Swan seemed to be ashamed of her behavior. Soon, loud pop music came from the room. Laurel Swan took a plate of pilaf to her daughter. Pete could hear the teacher trying to get her daughter to turn the music down, as it was impossible to study in such a noisy environment. "It's my house. I do what I want. If he doesn't like it, let him go to his own place," was the rude reply. It didn't last long, though. Linda changed her clothes and found herself at the door again. This time she was wearing ultra-short shorts. "What are you looking at?" she said menacingly to Pete. "Do you like me?" Pete blushed. "Where are you going? When are you coming back?" Laurel Swan became alarmed. She hadn't made a single comment about her daughter's appearance. It would have been useless to do so, apparently. "None of your business," the girl said rudely and slipped out the door. "Well, now we can get on with the class," Laurel Swan smiled sadly. Why? Why is she like that? Pete couldn't help but wonder. After a moment, he realized that such talk could be unpleasant for the teacher. But Laurel Swan sighed sadly and sat down opposite him. "You're a big boy, you understand a lot of things," she said. "I just couldn't cope with raising my daughter. I will teach other children, but myself. A cobbler without boots." Laurel Swan raised Linda alone. She was never married at all. Linda's father was the kind of guy who avoided responsibility. An adventurous individual living the life of an adventurer. And this character once met on the way of a quiet, modest girl who, probably for the first time in her life, went with her friends to a disco. What attracted him to her? Maybe it was the fact that she was different from himself. Exotic, so to speak. Either way, it was not difficult for an experienced man to interest an unsophisticated young person. It wasn't even an affair. They spent about 24 hours together. The young lady was in slight shock at how many events contained in these hours. Where she had been, what she had seen. Linda's father knew how to be interesting, knew how to organize exciting leisure time. He tried on different roles and masterfully played them himself, enjoying it. The morning he vaporized, as if he was not there. The girl managed to fall in love with him. She was looking for a mysterious beau for a long time, but he seemed to disappear into the water. Most likely, he was irrepressible. Laurel Swan had a daughter to remember the tumultuous but short-lived affair. "I was even glad then," she said. "For a long time I hoped that he would come back. And here I am with a baby. I thought his heart would be moved. We will live together." Then I realized, of course, that it was all just nonsense. Laurel Swan by that time had already graduated from the Teacher Training Institute and managed to get a job at the local gymnasium. She had to go on maternity leave. Money was tight. Laurel Swan lived with her mother in this very apartment. The old woman's pension was small, and her child allowance seemed even smaller. So Laurel Swan took up tutoring, running around all day in other people's apartments. She pounded hard truths into the heads of mostly neglectful students. Their parents were willing to pay a lot of money to make their children speak English. But the children themselves did not want to learn the language. Laurel Swan had to break through the wall of reluctance, and sometimes even disgust. Not a very pleasant occupation. But it paid good money. Linda was being looked after by her grandmother, and she was the first to notice the warning signs. Something she is some kind of too capricious. Always she is drawn somewhere, complained the old lady. She doesn't listen to me at all. I punish her blindly, but she does not care. Today she cut off my favorite sweater with scissors to spite me. Especially still looked at me, waiting for a reaction, continued to complain grandmother. And then she said, "I'm sorry, Mom." Well, something like that. Laurel Swan objected tiredly. And only 2.5 years old. What revenge? What disobedience? The child is just learning about the world, that's all. It's normal. Laurel Swan loved it when her daughter would run to the door in the evening. The first thing she did was to look in the bag, looking for something tasty, and always found a chocolate bar, or sweet fruit, or flavored buns. Laurel Swan did her best to please her daughter. Who else would make her happy? No father. Time passed. Linda went to kindergarten, where Laurel Swan returned to grammar school. That's where the trouble started. Now the teachers were complaining about Linda. She hits other kids, encourages the boys to play pranks, spits when she's in the wrong. The woman promised to talk to her daughter to improve the situation, and she did. But with her mother, Linda behaved like a real angel. It seemed that everyone was slandering the poor girl. The grandmother, the teachers. And then Laurel Swan's mother died suddenly, a heart attack, and the woman was left alone with her daughter. It was just about time for Linda to start first grade. But then Laurel Swan herself had to admit there was something wrong with her daughter. Linda categorically refused to learn. The girl was prepared for school at a fee-based center. They didn't talk about the problems there. Why scare clients who are paying good money? It turned out that Linda can neither read, nor write, nor operate even the smallest numbers. And worst of all, she doesn't want to learn those skills. Laurel Swan worked very hard. She practiced with her daughter every day, patiently endured her whims and reproaches. Only threats worked. Read the page, solve the examples, then you can go outside. Otherwise you'll stay home, Linda. The street beckoned to her with a terrible force. Sitting at home in 4 walls, it was for her like a prison. The girl shouted at her mother, called her names, threw notebooks and textbooks at the wall, and still had to fulfill the requirements of the parent. Then Linda was even weaker than her mother, physically weaker. And then, when she was older, Linda simply pushed Laurel Swan aside and went outside or ran away when she was at work. A woman couldn't guard her daughter 24 hours a day. Sometimes Linda just didn't make it home from school, going straight out to travel the neighborhood in the company of dubious friends. Laurel Swan was worried about her daughter and didn't know what to do. Prohibitions didn't help. In addition, Linda cheated, insulted her mother, took valuables from the house, which it seems then sold. She needed something to entertain herself with. Laurel Swan first smelled cigarettes on 10-year-old Linda. After getting drunk, the teacher's daughter showed up for the first time when she was 13. Laurel Swan talked a lot with her girl, told her how such behavior can turn out, what troubles await teenagers on the street. But Linda only smiled and looked down on her mother as if she were a fool. "What do you know about the free life, about the street?" she used to say. "You've spent your whole life fulfilling other people's wishes and expectations, parents, neighbors, and all that. And I don't care what people say. I was born free. And you're angry about it. I'm not like you." It was the truth. Linda, both in appearance and, most disturbingly, in character, took after the father she had never known or seen. There it was, the monstrous power of genes. The same frivolous adventurer, the same liar and actress, the the same rule-breaking adventurer. Laurel Swan fought for her daughter. She still hoped that nurture could overcome genetics. The woman took Linda to psychologists and psychotherapists, tried to become more of a friend, and give the girl more freedom. All in vain. The older Linda got, the more the chasm unfolded between them. It was so unlike Laurel Swan's relationship with her own mother. No warmth of heart, no mutual support, no shared interests. Linda seemed to despise her mother for her dull gray life, her poverty, her intellectualism. This girl herself considered herself an ideal. She could afford to do what she wanted. For example, to send the teacher in the classroom for the fact that she was picking on her appearance, or smoking on the school porch. Gradually, her parents became Linda's servants. Her mother fed her, made her money, gave her a roof over her head. She's necessary, only for this. True, she had to pay, listen to the occasional lecture. But Linda learned long ago to ignore them. Maybe it's just her age, Pete suggested after listening to Laurel Swan. There was so much pain in her eyes that he wanted something to comfort her. That's what I hope, she replied. As time passes, Linda will calm down, come to her senses. Think about the future, so long as nothing bad happens to her in the meantime. I'm so scared for her. Well, we're getting a little distracted. You need to study. Open your textbook to page 3. Pete came to Laurel Swan's house every Sunday. They studied hard for the pageant. They also drank fragrant tea with delicious homemade pastries and talked about very interesting topics. Laurel Swan tried to answer all of Pete's questions. She didn't dismiss any of them. She was wise, empathetic, and worried. Sometimes Linda was home during these sessions. One day she piled into the hallway, drunk at 15. She reeked of booze, tobacco smoke, and the girl's legs were a mess. It was late morning. It looked like Linda hadn't been home last night. The girl passed out in the hallway. Pete helped the teacher drag her senseless body to the bed. It's just the way we live, Laurel Swan sighed later. Nothing works on her. Linda was even worse than the violent girls at the orphanage. Those were toughened by their hard fate and the need to fight for survival. And Linda, why? She has clothes and her own room and delicious food. And most importantly, such a wonderful mom. Once, in Pete's presence, Linda insulted Laurel Swan. She tried to ask her daughter if she would be back for dinner. The girl was irritated about something. She unleashed an angry tirade on her mother, and Pete stood up for Laurel. But she doesn't deserve to be treated like that, he said. And then something happened that the boy never expected. Linda jumped up and slapped him so hard that his eyes went black. "You're going to tell me what to do in my own house," she shouted. Linda's eyes burned with evil fire. "You bitch." From then on, Pete thought the girl was crazy sick. Well, it happens. Not necessarily. People with mental illness look like fools. Some of them are geniuses, he said. A normal person can't be like that. One day the boy even shared his speculations with his teacher. He was worried before the conversation, afraid to offend Laurel, but she realized that it was just an expression of concern for herself. No, there's nothing wrong with her mentally. I've had her seen by several psychiatrists since she was a baby. The verdict is clear, everything is within normal limits, Laurel replied. Pete didn't tell anyone about Laurel's daughter. The teacher didn't ask him specifically, but he understood it himself. He only shared it with Irina. They always told each other everything. Silly Linda doesn't understand her happiness, the girl shook her head. I wish I had such a mother. Irina felt sorry for the kind teacher. Other children were drawn to Laurel, even the worst bullies. And her own daughter? Closer to the date of the competition, one serious problem came to light. It turned out that the participants had to pay for their own transportation. And this is a lot of money, tickets for the child and the chaperone, a few days of hotel accommodation, meals. But no, I can't allocate such a sum. The director of the orphanage refused at once. Where from? We need to fix the roof. And it's fall, and many of the children have outgrown warm clothes. Pete heard Laurel Swan persuading the director of the orphanage, convincing him that Pete's participation in the contest was a chance for a normal life. Then she tried to prove that his win was good for the orphanage. You're going to get so many sponsors after this. They will fix the roof, buy clothes for the children, and make a sports field, she said. He still has to win. And where are the guarantees? Objected the director. He has great potential, no doubt. But I don't believe that our pupil could beat everyone at an event of this level and scale. Pete was catching every word, and everything was tightening inside him. Could it be that because of financial difficulties he would not even go to the competition? It turned out that he had practiced, tried, and hoped for nothing. The boy had a goal, a dream, and now he felt like the ground had been knocked out from under him. I'll think of something, Laurel Swan promised Pete, who was barely holding back tears. Don't worry, I'll find the money and we'll go to the pageant. You'll see. Laurel has since begun to pound the doorsteps of the administration. She even appealed to city businessmen, but apparently no one believed in the talents of the boy from the orphanage. No one was interested in the teacher's proposals. Pete saw how hard Laurel was working for him. He was very grateful to her for that. But he'd already accepted the fact that it wasn't going to work out. It was obvious. But one morning before school started, the teacher approached Pete. The boy was usually the earliest to get to class. He liked this quiet time in the morning, standing at the window, looking out at the street while the others bustled about before the next school day. We're going, Laurel told Pete with shining eyes of joy. I managed to find the right amount of money. Where? How? The boy's heart thumped in his chest like a captured animal. There are still people who care, the teacher replied evasively. The world is not without good people. Much later, on the eve of his departure, Pete learned that Laurel, having failed to achieve results, had simply taken out a loan. The payments were exorbitant for her, but she had decided to do it. Pete went to Laurel Swan's house on Sunday as usual. He hoped he wouldn't see Linda today, but she was home. You should be glad you're going to Washington, the girl measured him with a scornful glance. Your mother took out a loan because of you. She's always been a fool. She's always been a fool. She's always been stupid. Would not have her own daughter to buy brand-name sneakers. But no, she'd rather spend her money on something stupid. She's pissing me off on purpose. Are you here for me? Pete turned to Laurel. She suddenly blushed as if she'd done something embarrassing. She was embarrassed that Pete had found out the truth. Don't think about it, she said. I've been wanting to go to Washington myself for a long time. Anyway, it's such a chance. The principal's going to give me a raise after you win. I'll pay off the loan. It's okay. After that, Pete decided he was going to win. He would win at any cost. He couldn't let Laurel Swan down. And the kid won that pageant. Standing on the stage in the spotlight, he felt no excitement. His mind was clear and bright. It was a tough subject. You could say he was unlucky. But Pete did it. He gave such a monologue that the whole hall applauded him for a long time. The results were to be announced the next day. Objectively, you were the best, but it's possible Laurel was worried. You can't rule out Blatt connections. Pete was not among the winners. They announced third place, then second place. Laurel looked hopefully at the stage. Pete, however, was already convinced that it had failed. And then the announcer called out his name. The room erupted in applause. First place. Victory. And then it was all over in a flash. Pete didn't even realize it. He returned to the orphanage, where he was greeted as a winner should be greeted. Esmeralda even cried tears of joy. And Laurel Swan, she was glowing with happiness that everything had worked out. Soon people from the boarding school for gifted children came to pick Pete up. They spent a couple of days taking care of him. Some formal moments preparing documents, studying the boy's personal history. Pete realized that they were taking him somewhere to a new life, which he deserved, according to Laurel Swan. He had a future now. A brilliant future. Pete would become strong, smart, wealthy. He won the lucky ticket thanks to Laurel, of course, and the support of Esmeralda. They're the ones who are very hard to part with. They're the people closest to Pete. Esmeralda's a bit of a worry to leave behind. How's she going to be here without him for another 3 years? Who's going to protect her? Laurel promised to keep an eye on her. Still, it's scary and sad and hard. It would be a long time without seeing her loved ones. On the other hand, it's worth it to be patient for a few years. After all, then Pete will become an influential and wealthy man, will do everything for it. and then he would thank Laurel and make Esmeralda's life a fairy tale. The second point Pete managed to realize not immediately, of course. First, the boy spent 3 years in a boarding school for gifted children. It was a real palace with a magnificent garden, a separate room, classrooms, equipped with the latest technology. Smart, motivated kids. Pete finally made friends here, local kids. He had a lot of common topics and interests, so friendships formed somehow by themselves. The teachers noticed the smallest abilities of their students and tried to develop them. They were very pleasant and educated people, communication with whom enriched and developed. But Pete had never had such a warm relationship with anyone as he had with Laurel. He often remembered his teacher, worried about whether it was hard for her to pay off the loan, whether Linda was hurting her. After graduating from boarding school, Pete entered the University of Washington without exams. During the years of study, the guy managed to win several Olympiads at the national level, which gave him special preferences. Many boarding school graduates entered prestigious universities in this way, without exams. Scholarship, dormitory, support of mentors who continued to supervise and accompany students even after graduation. Pete's life became easier, calmer, more interesting. While still a student, he found a job. He was hired by a large tour company as a translator. Pete began to earn good money. That's when he was finally able to return to his hometown. And he was eager to see Laurel and, of course, to find Esmeralda. Finding Esmeralda was no problem. The director of the orphanage gave the address of the apartment, which the girl received after graduation as a round orphan. It was some kind of barrack-type shanty town in the middle of nowhere. Always drunken neighbors, mountains of garbage everywhere. Esmeralda graduated from college and now worked as a dressmaker's assistant in an attire. She made a pittance, lived in a hole. "I never thought you'd come back." Esmeralda's eyes shone like 2 bright stars at the sight of Pete. "How grown up are you now? Are you handsome?" "How could I leave you?" Pete smiled, hugging her. "I missed you so much. You won't live here anymore. You won't stay a single day in this horrible house." That same evening, Pete helped Esmeralda move into her parents' apartment. It had been empty the whole time. The old neighbors were gone, the older ones had died. The younger ones had moved out. "Too bad. It would have been nice to talk to old friends," Pete sighed. "But the main thing is that Esmeralda will have a normal life now. I'll feel better. And it's nice to have a loved one living in my own apartment. It makes my soul feel warmer." But Laurel was never found. Her apartment was now occupied by new tenants. "The landlady sold it to us 2 years ago," said the woman in a bathrobe who opened the door for Pete. "She and her daughter had moved somewhere in the country, I think. I don't know the details. I don't need to know." Pete returned to Washington and continued to study and work. But now every vacation he returned home to Seattle, where Esmeralda was waiting for him. After graduation, Pete was hired by the State Department. The position was offered at once responsible and highly paid. As Laurel Swan had once assumed, winning a prestigious competition became Pete's ticket to life. Now he was being guided and supervised. The boy's life seemed to run on carefully laid rails. Everything seemed to work itself out. Pete bought an apartment in Washington. Esmeralda moved in with him. They got married. Pete was moving up the career ladder. He had to work hard, but it paid off. Esmeralda stayed at home, taking care of the children and the household. She sincerely enjoyed motherhood and loved her husband very much. Pete was pleased and warmed to come home from work. The man made several more attempts to find Laurel, but to no avail. Her tracks were lost after moving out of her old apartment. Too bad for Pete. He so wanted to thank her again, so wanted her to see what he had accomplished. All her efforts were not in vain. A good woman deserves to be thanked, and not just verbal gratitude. After a few years, Pete realized that working in the ministry takes too much time and energy. He was missing out on happy and important moments. The son went to the 1st grade, but the father did not get to the lineup because of an urgent meeting. The daughter performed for the first time with a ballet group in the theater, but busy Pete at this time was conducting important negotiations, and the man decided to go into the restaurant business. When the opportunity to open his own business presented itself, and now Pete has a chain of restaurants in the capital. He's his own boss. Work, of course, you have to work a lot, but the man is able to regulate his own schedule so that everywhere has time. And that's just great. Today he stayed up late with reports, but tomorrow he has a free day to devote to his family. Pete left the office with a feeling of accomplishment. On the street, he smiled at the anticipation of seeing his wife and children. And there's this old woman at the restaurant bins who looks a lot like Laurel Swan. That resemblance is frightening. But the woman at the dumpster certainly can't be Laurel. The teacher has a place to live, and she had a job, which means she has a pension. "Hello, Pete." The woman smiled sadly. "Is this how you've grown up? Handsome, mature, strong. Just like you always dreamed you'd be." "Laurel Swan?" Pete asked in disbelief. The woman nodded her head. Pete invited her into his office. On the way, they both expressed their joy at the chance meeting, each in their own way. Laurel smiled warmly and a little embarrassed. Pete was talking excitedly about his life and how long he had been looking for her. Finally, they were in Pete's office. "It's nice and cozy here," the man said, and gestured for Laurel to sit down on a comfortable couch in the corner, placed especially for visitors. Then he made coffee for the guest himself, put cookies in a plate for the visitors. Usually Lexi's secretary took care of the guests, but at this late hour, of course, she was at home. "Laurel, it's just amazing that we met. I've been thinking about you so much, looking for you for so long. I wanted you to know how much I've achieved thanks to you." "Thanks to yourself," the older woman corrected, looking at Pete with pride. "Talented, persistent, hardworking. That's what made it all work. You know very well that if it hadn't been for you, I don't know who I'd be now. A good man. You'd still be a good man without me, and you'd still be a success. Maybe not so soon. Of course, kids like you with a backbone, you can tell. You can trust me. I have a lot of experience." "But why you?" Pete hesitated, searching for words. "How did you end up in this position? It's obvious that you need." "It's obvious I'm old," Laurel Swan sighed. "And speak plainly." It was obvious that she was uncomfortable in front of her former student, ashamed that he could see her in this position. "Tell me," Pete asked. "Okay," Laurel nodded. "It's a long story, and I can't say I'm surprised by the ending. It was coming. After Pete was taken away to a boarding school for gifted children, I started having a lot of trouble with Linda. The 15-year-old girl was now often spending the night with who knows where, showing up home in the morning, or even a few days after she went missing. Sometimes she was brought by the police, whom I asked for help, because the girl was a minor. Exhortations, threats, heart-to-heart talks, everything was bypassed. I even tried to lock my daughter up when I went to work. I couldn't work, I had to live on something. But one day a freedom-loving person cleaned through the balcony, tied the sheets, and went down them from the 4th floor. After that, I stopped locking her up. It's dangerous." The teenager now spoke to her mother only in foul language. All the valuables, jewelry, appliances were missing from the house. Someone even took the washing machine. Linda needed money for booze, for the bars that attracted her so much. She didn't seem to see any other pleasures, although I tried from childhood to instill in her a love of beauty, books, theater, learning new things. In everything that happened to my daughter, I partly blamed her bad company, marginal teenagers from dysfunctional families. They didn't study, they didn't work. Glassy, completely empty eyes, the stamp of limitation on their faces, ungroomed, perpetually gray and ragged. And these people somehow had a great influence on her daughter. Linda was hospitalized several times. Her young body could not withstand such a life. Doctors warned that if the teenager continues in the same vein, the consequences could be fatal. So Laurel decided to take drastic measures to take her daughter to the village. Yes, sell the apartment, buy a house in a remote village, away from civilization. Fresh air, physical labor, breaking old ties. And the change of scenery itself, according to the desperate mother, should have brought Linda to her senses. It was hard to get out of her own way like that, to leave everything behind and sell the apartment. And there was no guarantee that Linda would get better. But I had to try. I had to do something. Laurel sighed. "Did you show her to the doctors?" "Of course. Once I even managed to put her in the clinic, but she ran away from there, and then refused to go to specialists at all. She was happy with everything. She didn't consider herself sick. It's not like she had to be carried around on a horse." Linda was furious when she heard her mother's decision. At first, she refused to go with her to the village, so Laurel went to her new place of residence alone. The woman was at a loss. She had only made the move for her daughter's sake, and Linda had found a way to stay in the city, living with someone from her company. It seemed that Laurel's move had backfired. She herself had pushed her daughter closer to those she had tried to keep her away from. But then Linda was back, angry, thin, wrinkled. She was quickly turning on those she so loved to spend time with. Apparently, she lived with one of her friends, but the cramped overcrowding, the lack of money, the constant yelling and fighting, such conditions did not suit her. And she had to live on something. So Linda gritted her teeth and returned to her mother. At least she would always feed and provide a clean bed. Laurel Swan was a little relieved. Maybe her plan would work after all. Maybe Linda would come to her senses here. Nothing of the sort. Soon Linda's old friends began to visit the village. Sometimes the girl herself went to the city. 150 kilometers was not such an insurmountable obstacle. Leisure activities continued. Moreover, sociable Linda and in the village found a similar company. There was one overgrown, garbage-strewn house with a leaky roof. In it lived a woman with 5 small children from different fathers. Maybe the lady herself did not know who her children were from, as she was almost always drunk. In this house there were endless parties, in which Linda took part with pleasure. And then one day Laurel noticed that her daughter had a rounded belly. Linda, it turned out, was expecting a baby. Yes, she shrugged her sharp shoulders when her mother shared her suspicions with her. What's the big deal? I'm 18 years old. I have the right. Who's the father? Laurel asked. Was he one of our village fathers? I'm a townie, but honestly I don't remember his name very well. We met at the club. To be honest, I can hardly even remember what he looked like. Well, it's just like you used to be. Doesn't it remind you of anything? Laurel clutched at her heart, and Linda smiled happily. She always liked to shock her mother. Even when she was pregnant, Linda was still living her usual lifestyle, drinking, smoking, disappearing to the city, and then to the village house. Her mother's request to stop drinking did not touch her. It seems that she was absolutely indifferent to the fate of her own child. None of your business. That's all Laurel heard in response to her exhortations. Laurel's grandson was born well before his due date. He was so tiny, so weak. Linda was wheeled into the birthing center right off the street since she was just in town. The contractions curled her up in front of the store. The baby was born weak and sickly and was left in the hospital. Linda was discharged alone. With her coveted freedom, she plunged headlong into her old life. Laurel Swan went to see Willie and talked to the doctors. The baby wasn't doing well. Linda's lifestyle during pregnancy had not gone unnoticed. Underdeveloped many organs and systems, heart defect, brain damage. Doctors made it clear that if the baby survived, he would remain profoundly disabled, needing care for life. But life was unlikely to be long either. Doctors unanimously advised to give up the crumb. But how? How could one abandon this touching pale baby with expressive eyes? He already recognized Laurel, looked at her, tried to smile at his grandmother. True, Linda for some time was determined to give up her son. What do I need him for? An invalid. All the more I will still give birth to another healthy. It's horrible. Laurel tried to get through to her daughter. He's a human being. What will he be like in an orphanage? And then Linda had a sudden change of heart. She said that of course she would take Willie home. As it turned out later, a friend with many children convinced the young mother. The children are entitled to benefits. There are even more for the disabled. That's all it was. Willie was discharged. The arrival of the child did not affect Linda's lifestyle. With a light heart, she was free to go home and sleep in a normal environment. Willie was on welfare, so Linda was now walking around with her own source of income. She became even more popular in certain circles. Seeing this, Laurel didn't even try to reason with her daughter. She realized it was useless. Such was the irresistible power of genes. Laurel didn't blame herself for what had happened to Linda. She knew she had given her daughter enough time and done everything she could to raise her to be a decent person. Now Laurel Swan was taking care of Willie, treating him, developing him, traveling with the baby to doctors. Of course, people, including doctors, wondered where the child's mother was, why his upbringing was being taken care of by his grandmother. Laurel lied to everyone, saying that her daughter was working so that her son would have everything he needed. And she, the grandmother, was only helping the young mother of a disabled child. No, Laurel was not ashamed of her daughter's behavior. She hadn't been afraid of people's judgment for a long time. She was afraid of something else. Linda could be deprived of parental rights, and Willie will go to boarding school. It is unlikely that he will be left to his grandmother. Neither the conditions in their house are not so good, nor the age for guardianship is already old enough, and the income is meager. So Laurel got by, giving birth to her grandson as best she could. And then Linda brought home her husband, a grown man with red, cloudy eyes from constant drinking, and announced that he would now live here. Laurel thought it couldn't get any worse and harder for her. But it turned out she was wrong. This Adrian made her existence a living hell. He immediately felt like the owner of someone else's house. Adrian emptied the refrigerator without a care in the world. He didn't care if Laurel used the last of her money to buy fruit or milk for Willie. The man never cleaned up after himself, swearing loudly at Linda and Laurel if something was out of place. Sometimes he even got handsy. And now they had a bunch of Adrian's buddies over to their house. It was unbearable. All night long, the youths were buzzing in the kitchen. Mats, loud laughter, swearing, cigarette smoke all over the house, glasses clinking. Sometimes even fights broke out. Willie was restless in his sleep. Laurel sat next to him. She couldn't sleep. There was no telling what might happen, a fire or something. No, one had to stay alert. Linda was quite happy with this existence. She defended Adrian to her mother, as if she didn't notice her husband's rough treatment of both of them. I couldn't leave. How could I leave Willie with them? Grandmother waved a jinx at the sudden return of her tears. My grandson loved me. I was his only hope, and for his sake I put up with all this. I would have run away a long time ago. In fact, that's what I did when Willie. From the very beginning, the disabled boy was expected to live a short life, but grandmother hoped for a medical error and the power of modern medicine. At first the kid seemed to be doing well, but then the disease took its toll. Every day the boy grew weaker, thinner, became indifferent to what was happening. Nothing pleased him. His grandmother went to the hospital with him. At first they lay in the ward together, then the child was transferred to the intensive care unit. That was it. The grandmother sobbed for several days when the doctors told her the terrible news. The daughter and her roommate were saddened only by the fact that they lost their source of income. Well, one more, the daughter shrugged. It's a simple matter, the man smirked. The grandmother, listening to this dialogue, realized no, she couldn't stay in the same house with her daughter for another minute. This is some kind of alien, scary, heartless creature. Here I packed my things and ran away here to Moscow. My pension is quite meager. My daughter took out loans in my name, and now the bailiffs are deducting them from my pension. I get pennies, but nothing. Time is passing. I'll pay it off soon. I sleep in a hostel. I don't have my own place. But it's better than enduring the antics of my daughter and her roommate. I don't always have enough to eat, so I do it at night near restaurants and cafes. You don't have the security guards like other places. That's why I come here a lot. I didn't even know you owned this place. So, life has turned around. The restaurant owner shook his head. What he had heard did not fit in his head. This kind, caring woman, a talented teacher, and lives like this. Collects food almost on the garbage dump. My heart squeezed with pity for this bright person. The teacher did not deserve such a fate. But now everything will change. To believe or not to believe, he began suddenly. But I've been looking for you. I've been looking for you for a long time, just to thank you. And now I've found you. You'll have your own apartment now. Cozy, clean, just like it used to be. If your pension isn't enough to live on, you'll work part-time as a tutor. You're a great teacher. You love your work. And people need your knowledge. I have friends whose school children need extra lessons. They will be only happy to such a tutor like you. And the pay will be good, don't even doubt it. I hate to put you to such a strain, the woman replied. Consider it a debt I'm repaying. It must have been hard for you to pay off that loan you took out to send me to the contest. And this help cost me nothing now. I'm glad. I also need you to meet my children. And you know my wife, she will be very glad to see you. The teacher smiled as she looked at her former student. Yes, I'm looking forward to seeing your and Irina's children too. I'm so happy for you.